The genealogical foundations of Persephone's divine identity emerge from the earlier systematic accounts of Greek mythology, most notably in Hesiod's Theogony, composed around 700 BC. According to Hesiod's genealogical framework, Persephone stands as the daughter of two of the most powerful deities in the Greek pantheon, Demeter, the goddess of harvest, grain, and agricultural abundance, and Zeus, the supreme ruler of the Olympian gods and master of the heavens. This parentage immediately establishes Persephone within the highest echelons of divine hierarchy, connecting her simultaneously to the Earth's fertility and the cosmic order that governs all existence. Hesiod's account presents Demeter as one of the 6 children of the Titans Kronos and Rhea, making her Zeus's sister. The union between Zeus and Demeter that produced Persephone represents one of many instances where Zeus exercised his authority through divine procreation, expanding his influence across different domains of natural and supernatural power. The Theogony describes this relationship matter-of-factly, without the dramatic narratives that would later characterize other mythological accounts, positioning Persephone's birth as part of the fundamental ordering of the cosmos. Other early sources corroborate this genealogy while adding nuanced details. The Homeric hymn to Demeter, dating to the 7th or 6th century BC, confirms Persephone's parentage while emphasizing her special relationship with her mother. The hymn presents Persephone as Demeter's beloved daughter, whose beauty and grace made her precious beyond measure. Archaeological evidence from various Greek sites has uncovered votive offerings and inscriptions that reference Kor Demetros, literally Demeter's daughter, demonstrating how this familial relationship became central to religious practice and popular understanding. The significance of this divine parentage extends beyond mere genealogy. Demeter's domain over agricultural cycles and Zeus's control over seasonal weather patterns created in Persephone a figure who embodied the intersection of earthly fertility and celestial power. Ancient Greek religious thought understood these connections as fundamental to the natural order, with Persephone serving as a bridge between her parents' complementary but distinct spheres of influence. Before her association with the Underworld transformed her identity, Persephone existed primarily as Kor, meaning simply the maiden in ancient Greek. This designation carried profound religious and cultural significance that extended far beyond a mere descriptive title. Kor represented the archetypal young woman at the threshold of adulthood, embodying the potential for fertility, growth, and renewal that characterized both human development and agricultural cycles. The title Kor appears extensively in early Greek religious texts and inscriptions, often without any additional identifying information, suggesting that this designation alone was sufficient to invoke the goddess's presence and power. Votive offerings from sanctuaries across the Greek world frequently bear dedications to Kor, indicating widespread recognition of this identity. The simplicity of the name reflects an ancient understanding that certain divine concepts required no elaborate titles or epithets. The essential nature of maidenhood itself was sacred and powerful enough to command reverence. Archaeological investigations have revealed that the worship of Kor predated many of the more complex mythological narratives that would later define Persephone's story. Excavations at sites like Eleusis, Aegina, and various locations throughout the Peloponnese have uncovered ritual objects, temple foundations, and artistic representations that clearly depict maiden goddesses receiving offerings and participating in religious ceremonies focused on fertility and agricultural abundance. These artifacts demonstrate that Kor's religious significance was well established in Greek communities long before the development of the elaborate mythology surrounding her abduction and marriage to Hades. The concept of Kor as a pre-Olympian earth goddess connects to broader patterns in ancient Mediterranean religious development. Many scholars argue that Kor represents a survival of much older goddess traditions that emphasized feminine divine power over fertility, seasonal cycles, and the mysteries of life and death. These earlier religious systems often featured powerful female deities who controlled agricultural abundance and human reproduction, concepts that became incorporated into later Greek religious thought through figures like Kor. Evidence from Linear B tablets found at Mycenaean palace sites provides crucial insights into the pre-classical origins of Persephone's religious significance. These administrative records, dating from approximately 1450 to 1200 BC, contain references to religious festivals and offerings that appear to honour mother-daughter goddess pairs associated with fertility and seasonal renewal. While the Linear B script uses different names and spellings than later Greek texts, many scholars identify clear connections between these Mycenaean religious practices and the later worship of Demeter and Persephone. The Pylos tablets, discovered at the Palace of Nestor in southwestern Greece, include detailed records of religious offerings made to various deities. Among these entries, researchers have identified references to Posidaia and Koreia, which many linguists interpret as early forms of the names later associated with Poseidon and Kor. The context of these offerings suggests elaborate religious ceremonies involving agricultural products, livestock, and precious goods, indicating that mother-daughter fertility goddesses held positions of extreme importance in Mycenaean religious life. At Knossos, the administrative centre of Minoan Crete, Linear B tablets record similar religious practices. The famous Room of the Throne tablets contain inventories of offerings made to female deities whose descriptions closely match later Greek accounts of Demeter and Persephone. These records mention specific quantities of grain, honey, olive oil and wine offered during seasonal festivals, suggesting that the religious calendar revolved around ceremonies honouring these goddesses at crucial points in the agricultural year. The Mycenaean evidence becomes particularly significant when considered alongside archaeological discoveries from the same period. Excavations at major Mycenaean centres have uncovered shrine rooms containing female figurines, ritual vessels, and agricultural symbols that clearly connect to fertility goddess worship. The famous snake goddess figurines from Knossos, while predating the Mycenaean period, demonstrate the continuity of female divine imagery associated with earth goddess traditions throughout the Bronze Age Aegean. Cretan archaeological sites provide the most extensive evidence for early mother-daughter goddess worship in the ancient Mediterranean. The Minoan civilization, which flourished on Crete from approximately 2600 to 1100 BC, developed sophisticated religious practices centered around powerful female deities who controlled fertility, seasonal cycles, and the mysteries of life and death. While Minoan religious beliefs cannot be directly equated with later Greek mythology, the archaeological record reveals striking parallels that suggest significant cultural continuity. The palace complex at Knossos has yielded numerous artifacts that appear to depict mother-daughter goddess pairs participating in religious ceremonies. Frescoes from the palace walls show female figures wearing elaborate clothing and jewellery, holding symbols associated with fertility and agricultural abundance. These images often appear in pairs, with one figure clearly representing a mature woman and the other a younger female, suggesting the archetypal mother-daughter relationship that would later characterize Demeter and Persephone. Excavations at the sacred cave of Eileithyia, located near Knossos, have uncovered evidence of continuous religious activity spanning over 2 millennia. The cave contains numerous votive offerings, including female figurines, agricultural products, and ritual vessels that demonstrate sustained worship of fertility goddesses. The archaeological layers show that religious practices evolved gradually over time, with later Greek elements incorporating and transforming earlier Minoan traditions, rather than replacing them entirely. The site of Archanes, located in central Crete, has provided particularly compelling evidence for mother-daughter goddess worship. The temple complex there contains multiple shrine rooms decorated with frescoes depicting female figures engaged in religious rituals involving grain, flowers, and seasonal symbols. The artistic style and religious iconography clearly connect these images to fertility goddess traditions, while the archaeological context demonstrates their central importance in Minoan religious life. Mainland Greek sites have yielded complementary evidence for early fertility goddess worship. The sanctuary at Eleusis, which would later become famous for the Eleusinian mysteries, dedicated to Demeter and Persephone, shows evidence of religious activity dating back to the Mycenaean period. Archaeological investigations have revealed multiple building phases, with the earliest structures containing ritual objects and architectural features that clearly connect to fertility goddess worship. The Argolid region of the Peloponnese has produced extensive archaeological evidence for Bronze Age goddess worship. Sites like Tiryns, Mycenae and Argos contain shrine rooms and ritual deposits that include female figurines, agricultural symbols, and seasonal offerings. These artifacts demonstrate that mother-daughter fertility goddesses held central positions in Mycenaean religious practice, with elaborate ceremonies marking crucial points in the agricultural calendar. The linguistic origins of Persephone's name provide crucial insights into ancient Greek understanding of her divine nature and cosmic significance. Modern etymological analysis reveals that Persephone likely derives from two ancient Greek roots: pharaoh, meaning to bring or to carry, and phone, meaning murder, destruction or death. This combination creates a name that literally translates to bringer of destruction or carrier of death, reflecting ancient Greek recognition of the goddess's connection to both fertility and mortality. The linguistic evidence suggests that ancient Greeks understood Persephone as a figure who embodied the fundamental paradox of existence, the inseparable connection between life and death, growth and decay, creation and destruction. This understanding appears throughout early Greek literature and religious texts, where Persephone's name evokes both the life-giving power of seasonal renewal and the inevitable reality of mortality that underlies all natural processes. Alternative etymological interpretations propose different origins for Persephone's name, but most maintain connections to concepts of transformation and seasonal change. Some scholars argue that the name derives from Persephassa, an earlier form that may connect to ancient words for threshing or winnowing, agricultural processes that separate grain from chaff and thus symbolically represent the separation of life from death. This interpretation reinforces Persephone's association with agricultural cycles and the transformative processes that govern both human life and natural phenomena. The evolution of Persephone's name through different periods of Greek history reflects changing religious and cultural emphases. Early inscriptions and literary references show variations in spelling and pronunciation that suggest regional differences in worship practices and mythological understanding. These linguistic variations provide valuable evidence for how different Greek communities understood and honoured the goddess, while also demonstrating the gradual standardization of her mythology across the Greek world. The most comprehensive and authoritative account of Persephone's abduction appears in the Homeric hymn to Demeter, a substantial religious poem composed during the 7th or 6th century BC. This 495-line hymn represents not merely a mythological narrative, but a sophisticated theological treatise that established the canonical version of events for subsequent Greek religious practice. The anonymous poet, working within the established Homeric tradition, crafted a detailed account that would influence virtually every later retelling of Persephone's story. The Homeric hymn begins with Persephone gathering flowers in a meadow alongside the daughters of Oceanus, establishing the pastoral setting that would become standard in later versions. The poet specifically names several of her companions: Leucippe, Phano, Electra, Ianthe, Melita, Iache, Rhodea, Callirrhoe, Melibosis, Tyche, Osiro, Chryses, Yanera, Acaste, Admete, Rhodope, Pluto, Calypso, Styx, Urania, and Galaxora, creating a vivid picture of divine maidens engaged in innocent recreation. The detailed catalogue of names serves multiple purposes. It emphasizes the communal nature of divine feminine society, establishes the normalcy of the moment before disruption, and provides specific geographical connections through the inclusion of nymphs associated with particular locations. The hymn describes Persephone's attraction to a particularly beautiful narcissus flower, which Zeus had caused to bloom specifically to facilitate the abduction. The poet presents this flower as possessing supernatural qualities. It radiates divine fragrance that fills the earth and sky, and its 100 blooms create an otherworldly spectacle that draws Persephone away from her companions. The narcissus serves as more than mere bait. It represents the fatal attraction of beauty and the dangerous allure of the unknown. When Persephone reaches for the flower with both hands, the earth splits open beneath her feet, revealing the chasm through which Hades emerges. The Homeric account emphasizes the violence and terror of the abduction itself. Hades appears driving his immortal horses, seizes the unwilling Persephone, and carries her away in his golden chariot despite her screams for help. The hymn specifically notes that her cries reach the peaks of mountains and the depths of the sea, but no god or mortal comes to her aid except Helios, the sun god, who witnesses everything from his celestial position. This detail establishes the cosmic scope of the event while highlighting the isolation and helplessness of the victim. The geographical precision of the Homeric hymn becomes particularly significant when examining the abduction site. The poet locates the event in the Nisaean plain, a location that ancient sources variously identified with different regions across the Greek world. The hymn describes this plain as extraordinarily fertile and beautiful, filled with roses, crocuses, violets, irises, hyacinths, and the fateful narcissus. This idealized landscape represents the perfect setting for maiden goddesses to gather flowers, but it also serves as the threshold between the upper and lower worlds. The role of Zeus in the Homeric version deserves particular attention for its theological implications. The hymn explicitly states that Zeus gave Persephone to Hades as his bride, acting in his capacity as the supreme divine authority who arranges marriages among the gods. The poet presents this decision as part of Zeus's broader cosmic responsibilities, but also acknowledges that he made this arrangement without consulting Demeter. This detail creates the fundamental tension that drives the entire narrative. Zeus's legitimate exercise of paternal authority conflicts with Demeter's maternal bonds and her daughter's personal autonomy. The Homeric hymn's treatment of divine psychology proves remarkably sophisticated. Demeter's grief manifests not merely as emotional distress, but as cosmic disruption that threatens the survival of all life on Earth. The goddess withdraws her favour from the land, causing crops to fail and bringing humanity to the brink of starvation. This consequence forces Zeus to negotiate a resolution, demonstrating that even supreme divine authority must accommodate the legitimate claims of other powerful deities. The hymn thus presents a complex picture of divine politics, where absolute power remains subject to practical limitations. Ovid's account in the Metamorphoses, composed around 8 AD, provides a significantly different perspective on the same events while drawing heavily from earlier Greek sources. Writing for a Roman audience during the early imperial period, Ovid emphasizes different aspects of the story that reflect Roman literary sensibilities and cultural values. His version maintains the basic narrative structure established by the Homeric hymn, but introduces new details and interpretations that would prove influential for later European literature. Ovid's treatment of the abduction scene emphasizes the aesthetic and emotional dimensions of the event. He describes Persephone as extraordinarily beautiful, wearing a flowing dress and gathering flowers with graceful movements that attract Hades' attention. The Roman poet focuses on the visual spectacle of the abduction, describing Hades' chariot, his dark horses, and the dramatic opening of the earth in vivid detail. This emphasis on visual imagery reflects Roman artistic preferences, while also serving Ovid's broader literary goals in the Metamorphoses. The geographical setting in Ovid's version specifically identifies Sicily as the location of the abduction, particularly the area around Lake Pergus near modern Enna. Ovid describes this region as perpetually spring-like, with abundant flowers and perfect weather that creates an ideal environment for Persephone's flower-gathering activities. The Roman poet's choice of Sicily reflects both literary tradition and practical considerations. Sicily's association with Demeter worship was well established in the ancient world, and the island's volcanic activity provided a plausible explanation for the Earth's sudden opening. Ovid's characterization of the various divine participants reveals distinctly Roman perspectives on authority and family relationships. His Zeus appears more calculating and politically motivated than the figure in the Homeric hymn, arranging the marriage primarily to strengthen his own position by satisfying his brother Hades' desires. This interpretation reflects Roman understanding of political marriages as tools for maintaining stability among powerful families, whether human or divine. The Roman poet's treatment of Hades emphasizes the god's passionate attraction to Persephone rather than merely his desire for a suitable bride. Ovid describes Hades as overwhelmed by love at first sight, driven to desperate action by his inability to court Persephone through conventional means. This romantic interpretation would prove enormously influential in later European literature, transforming the story from a tale of divine politics into a narrative about the power of love to overcome social and cosmic boundaries. Claudian's De Raptu Proserpinae, composed around 395–400 AD, represents the most elaborate and detailed ancient account of Persephone's abduction. This epic poem, written during the late Roman Empire, combines traditional mythological elements with contemporary literary techniques to create a sophisticated narrative that reflects both classical learning and late antique sensibilities. Claudian's version extends far beyond the basic abduction story to include extensive background material, divine council scenes, and elaborate descriptions of both the upper and lower worlds. Claudian's account begins with an extended description of Sicily's natural beauty, emphasizing the island's role as Demeter's special domain. The poet describes the goddess personally tending to Sicilian agriculture, ensuring abundant harvests and perfect growing conditions. This idealized landscape serves as the setting for Persephone's innocent activities, but Claudian also uses it to explore themes about the relationship between divine favor and natural abundance. The late Roman poet's treatment of the divine council scene provides crucial insights into ancient understanding of cosmic governance. Claudian describes Jupiter convening a formal assembly of the gods to address Hades' request for a bride. The council's scene allows Claudian to explore questions about divine justice, legitimate authority, and the proper relationships between different spheres of cosmic power. Jupiter's decision to grant Hades' request reflects not arbitrary favoritism, but careful consideration of maintaining balance among the major divine powers. Claudian's description of the actual abduction emphasizes both its violence and its cosmic significance. The poet describes the earth splitting open with tremendous noise and upheaval, creating a chasm that extends deep into the underworld. Hades emerges driving a chariot pulled by 4 black horses, their eyes blazing with infernal fire and their breath creating clouds of sulphurous smoke. This dramatic imagery reflects late antique literary preferences, while also serving theological purposes by emphasizing the fundamental opposition between the realms of life and death. The geographical claims for Persephone's abduction site reflect both religious traditions and local civic pride throughout the ancient Greek and Roman worlds. Sicily maintained the strongest and most persistent claim, supported by extensive literary evidence and well-established religious practices. The island's association with Demeter worship dated back to the earliest periods of Greek colonization, and major cities like Syracuse developed elaborate festivals celebrating the goddess and her daughter. Lake Pergus, located in the interior of Sicily near modern Enna, became the most widely accepted specific location for the abduction, Ancient sources describe this lake as perfectly circular, surrounded by dense groves and perpetually blooming meadows that created an ideal setting for divine maidens to gather flowers. The lake's unusual characteristics, it never froze in winter or dried up in summer, suggested supernatural properties that made it a plausible threshold between worlds. Archaeological investigations around Lake Pergus have uncovered extensive evidence of ancient religious activity. Excavations have revealed temple foundations, votive deposits, and inscriptions that demonstrate continuous worship of Demeter and Persephone from the Greek colonial period through the Roman Empire. The physical remains include specialized ritual vessels, agricultural implements dedicated to the goddesses, and artistic representations of the abduction scene that confirm the site's mythological associations. Eleusis presented a competing claim based on its status as the primary centre for Demeter and Persephone worship in mainland Greece. The Eleusinian mysteries, among the most important religious institutions in the ancient world, centred around the story of Persephone's abduction and return. Local traditions at Eleusis claimed that the abduction occurred in nearby fields, with specific locations identified as the site where Persephone gathered flowers and the spot where the earth opened to receive Hades' chariot. The Eleusinian claim gained credibility from the site's undisputed importance in Demeter worship and the antiquity of religious practices there. Archaeological evidence demonstrates continuous religious activity at Eleusis from the Mycenaean period through the end of ancient paganism, suggesting that local traditions about Persephone's abduction might preserve genuine Bronze Age religious memories. The elaborate temple complex and the sophisticated theological doctrines of the mysteries provided institutional support for Eleusinian claims about the mythological events. Other locations across the Greek world advanced their own claims to the abduction site, reflecting the widespread popularity of Demeter and Persephone worship. The island of Crete claimed that the abduction occurred in the Messara plain, citing ancient traditions and local religious practices as evidence. Archaeological investigations in Crete have uncovered numerous sanctuaries dedicated to mother-daughter goddess pairs that may represent early forms of Demeter and Persephone worship. The Peloponnese contained several competing sites, including locations near Phoenius in Arcadia and various spots in the Argolid. These claims typically relied on local religious traditions, unusual geographical features, or historical connections to major Demeter sanctuaries. The diversity of geographical claims reflects both the widespread appeal of the Persephone myth and the tendency of ancient communities to connect their local landscapes with famous mythological events. The question of Zeus's role in facilitating or merely permitting the abduction reveals fundamental tensions in ancient Greek theological thinking. Different versions of the myth present varying degrees of divine complicity, ranging from active conspiracy to passive acquiescence. These variations reflect different understandings of cosmic justice, paternal authority, and the proper relationships between male and female divine powers. The Homeric hymn presents Zeus as the ultimate authority who grants Hades permission to marry Persephone, but it remains ambiguous about whether this decision represents careful deliberation or casual indifference to the consequences. The hymn emphasizes Zeus's surprise at Demeter's extreme reaction, suggesting that he underestimated the strength of maternal bonds and failed to anticipate the cosmic disruption that would result from his decision. Later sources increasingly present Zeus as an active conspirator who deliberately facilitates the abduction through various stratagems. These versions describe Zeus creating the narcissus flower, specifically to lure Persephone away from her companions, timing the abduction to occur when Demeter was absent, and ensuring that no other deity would interfere with Hades' plans. This interpretation emphasizes divine cunning and political calculation, while raising uncomfortable questions about the ethics of cosmic governance. Alternative traditions present Zeus as a more passive figure who simply fails to prevent events that he could have stopped. These versions suggest that Zeus knew about Hades' intentions, but chose not to intervene, either from indifference or from a belief that the marriage would ultimately prove beneficial. This interpretation attempts to preserve Zeus's moral authority, while acknowledging the problematic aspects of the abduction narrative. The theological implications of Zeus's various roles extend beyond the immediate story to broader questions about divine justice and cosmic order. Ancient Greek religious thought struggled to reconcile the reality of suffering and injustice with belief in benevolent divine governance. The Persephone myth encapsulates these tensions by presenting a story where legitimate divine authority produces tragic consequences that require complex negotiations to resolve. Ancient Greek conceptions of the underworld represented far more than a simple realm of the dead. The Greeks understood this subterranean domain as a complex, stratified cosmos, with distinct regions serving different functions in the cosmic order. When Persephone descended into this realm, she entered a sophisticated supernatural bureaucracy that governed the afterlife experiences of all mortals. The underworld consisted of three primary divisions: Hades proper, the general realm of the dead; Tartarus, the prison for the most heinous criminals and enemies of the gods; and the Elysian Fields, the paradise reserved for heroes and the exceptionally virtuous. Hades proper, named after its ruler, encompassed the vast majority of the underworld's territory and housed the souls of ordinary deceased mortals. Ancient sources describe this region as a shadowy reflection of the upper world, where the dead continued a diminished existence as insubstantial shades. The geography of Hades included recognizable features from the world above: meadows, groves, rivers and plains, but rendered in muted tones that reflected the reduced vitality of posthumous existence. The dead retained their memories and personalities, but lacked the physical substance and emotional intensity that characterized living beings. The rivers of Hades served as crucial boundaries and administrative features within the underworld. The Styx, most famous of these waterways, formed the primary barrier between the worlds of the living and the dead. Ancient sources describe the Styx as a dark, slow-moving river that the ferryman Charon crossed only with proper payment from the deceased. The river's waters possessed supernatural properties that made oaths sworn upon them absolutely binding, even for the gods themselves. Zeus used Styx water to compel truthfulness from other deities, demonstrating the river's cosmic significance beyond its role as a geographical boundary. The Acheron, described as the River of Woe, served as another major waterway within Hades. Ancient accounts present the Acheron as broader and more turbulent than the Styx, with dark waters that reflected the anguish of the newly dead. The river's banks provided gathering places where souls awaited judgment and assignment to their final destinations within the underworld. Archaeological evidence from various Greek sites has uncovered coins placed in the mouths of the dead, confirming the widespread belief in payment requirements for crossing these infernal rivers. Lethe, the River of Forgetfulness, played a crucial role in the underworld's function as a realm of transformation. Ancient sources describe souls drinking from Lethe's waters to erase memories of their earthly existence, preparing them for reincarnation or permanent residence among the dead. The river's location varied in different accounts, but most sources placed it near the entrance to the Elysian Fields, where souls prepared for either blessed existence or return to life. The concept of Lethe influenced Greek philosophical thought about memory, identity, and the relationship between knowledge and existence. Tartarus represented the underworld's most fearsome region, serving as both prison and place of punishment for those who had committed the most serious offences against divine and natural order. Ancient sources describe Tartarus as located far below Hades proper, surrounded by triple walls of bronze and accessible only through gates guarded by the 100-handed giants known as the Hecaton Chires. The distance between Tartarus and the upper world was so vast that a bronze anvil dropped from Earth would fall for 9 days before reaching Hades, then fall another 9 days before reaching Tartarus itself. The prisoners of Tartarus included both divine and mortal offenders whose crimes warranted eternal punishment. The Titans, defeated in their war against Zeus, occupied the deepest portions of Tartarus under constant guard by the Hecatan Shiras. Mortal inhabitants included figures like Tantalus, condemned to eternal hunger and thirst for his crimes against the gods, and Sisyphus, forced to roll a boulder up a mountain for eternity as punishment for his attempts to cheat death. These punishments reflected ancient Greek understanding of cosmic justice, where the severity of eternal torment matched the magnitude of offences against divine order. The Elysian Fields provided a stark contrast to both Hades proper and Tartarus, offering a paradise where heroes and the exceptionally virtuous enjoyed eternal bliss. Ancient descriptions present Elysium as a realm of perpetual spring, where gentle breezes carried the scent of flower across meadows that never faded. The inhabitants of Elysium engaged in idealized versions of earthly activities, athletic competitions, musical performances, philosophical discussions, and other pursuits that represented the highest achievements of human civilization. Access to the Elysian Fields required exceptional virtue or heroic achievement during mortal life. The criteria for admission evolved over time, with earlier sources emphasizing martial valor and later accounts including intellectual and moral excellence. Some traditions described a complex system where souls could earn admission to Elysium through multiple incarnations, gradually purifying themselves through repeated earthly existences until they achieved the moral perfection required for eternal paradise. The transformation of Hades from place to personified deity reflects the complex relationship between geography and theology in ancient Greek religious thought. As a place, Hades represented the inevitable destination of all mortal existence, the realm where death's democracy eliminated earthly distinctions of wealth, power, and status. As a deity, Hades embodied the inexorable power of death itself, ruling over his domain with absolute authority while remaining subject to the broader cosmic order established by Zeus and the other Olympian gods. Ancient sources present Hades as a formidable but not malevolent ruler whose primary concern involved maintaining order within his vast domain. Unlike later Christian conceptions of Satan as an active force of evil, Hades functioned more as a cosmic administrator whose responsibilities included ensuring that the dead remained in their proper realm and that the natural cycle of life and death continued without disruption. His marriage to Persephone represented not merely personal desire, but administrative necessity. The underworld required a queen to help govern its complex operations. The iconography associated with Hades emphasized his role as both king and judge of the dead. Ancient artistic representations typically showed him seated on a throne made of ebony or other dark materials, holding a scepter that symbolized his royal authority over the underworld. His appearance combined majesty with the somber associations of death. Ancient sources describe him as tall and imposing, with dark hair and beard, wearing robes that suggested both royal dignity and funeral solemnity. The helmet of invisibility, one of his primary attributes, demonstrated his ability to move unseen between the worlds of the living and the dead. Persephone's transformation from victim to co-ruler represents one of the most psychologically complex developments in Greek mythology. The process began with her consumption of pomegranate seeds, which bound her to the underworld according to ancient laws governing the realm of the dead. This seemingly simple act carried profound theological implications. By eating food from Hades' domain, Persephone became part of the underworld in a fundamental way that transcended mere physical presence. The pomegranate itself held deep symbolic significance in ancient Greek religious thought. Its numerous seeds represented fertility and abundance, while its blood-red interior suggested the life force that connected all living beings. The fruit's seasonal availability, ripening in late summer and early fall, aligned with the mythological timing of Persephone's annual descent to the underworld. Ancient artistic representations frequently showed Persephone holding pomegranates or pomegranate seeds, emphasizing the fruit's central role in her transformation from maiden to queen. Ancient sources present varying accounts of how Persephone consumed the pomegranate seeds, reflecting different understandings of her agency and complicity in her transformation. The Homeric hymn suggests that Hades secretly gave her the seeds before her departure, ensuring her return to the underworld. Later versions present Persephone as eating the seeds voluntarily, either from hunger or curiosity, making her partially responsible for her fate. These variations reflect ongoing ancient debates about free will, divine compulsion, and moral responsibility. The legal and theological implications of the pomegranate consumption extended beyond Persephone's personal fate to fundamental questions about the nature of divine law and cosmic order. Ancient Greek religious thought understood certain actions as creating binding obligations that even the gods could not simply override. Persephone's consumption of underworld food fell into this category, establishing a connection to Hades' realm that required negotiation rather than simple divine command to resolve. As queen of the underworld, Persephone assumed judicial and administrative responsibilities that transformed her from a passive victim into an active participant in cosmic governance. Ancient sources describe her involvement in various aspects of underworld administration, from judging the dead to managing the complex logistics of the afterlife. Her dual nature, simultaneously connected to the upper world through her mother and bound to the lower world through her marriage, made her uniquely qualified to mediate between different spheres of existence. Persephone's judicial role appears most prominently in stories involving heroes who attempted to enter the underworld while still alive. The myth of Orpheus provides the most detailed account of her involvement in such cases. When the legendary musician descended to Hades seeking to retrieve his deceased wife Eurydice, he performed before both Hades and Persephone, moving them with his sorrowful songs. Ancient sources emphasize Persephone's emotional response to Orpheus's music, describing how his laments for lost love reminded her of her own separation from the upper world and her mother. The negotiation between Orpheus and the underworld rulers demonstrates Persephone's active role in determining the fates of exceptional mortals. While Hades possessed ultimate authority within his realm, Persephone's intervention proved crucial in securing permission for Eurydice's return. Ancient accounts emphasize that both rulers had to agree to the arrangement, suggesting that Persephone's consent was legally necessary rather than merely diplomatic courtesy. The tragic failure of Orpheus's mission, his backward glance that sent Eurydice back to the dead, occurred despite Persephone's support, emphasizing the inviolable nature of underworld law, even when the rulers themselves showed mercy. The story of Theseus and Pirithous provides another crucial example of Persephone's judicial authority. These heroes descended to the underworld with the audacious plan of abducting Persephone herself, intending to make her Pirithous' bride. Ancient sources describe their capture and imprisonment in chairs of forgetfulness, supernatural seats that bound them with chains of amnesia and paralysis. When Heracles later descended to capture Cerberus as part of his 12 labours, he found the heroes still trapped and sought permission to free them. Persephone's response to Heracles' request reveals the complexity of her position as underworld queen. She granted permission for Theseus' release, recognizing that his participation in the abduction attempt resulted more from friendship loyalty than personal ambition. However, she refused to free Pirithous, whose direct offence against her person and marriage required permanent punishment. This distinction demonstrates sophisticated moral reasoning that considered both the severity of offences and the motivations behind them. Ancient artistic representations of Persephone's underworld throne and regalia provide crucial insights into Greek understanding of her transformed status and divine authority. Pottery paintings from the 5th and 4th centuries BC frequently depict Persephone seated beside Hades on elaborate thrones that emphasize their equal status as rulers of the dead. These thrones typically feature dark materials, ebony, obsidian, or other stones associated with the underworld, decorated with symbols of death and rebirth such as pomegranates, grain stalks, and serpents. The artistic evidence reveals careful attention to the symbolic elements of Persephone's royal regalia. Her crown, when depicted, often incorporates both flowers and precious stones, representing her dual connection to the fertile earth above and the mineral wealth below. Ancient artists frequently showed her holding a scepter topped with pomegranate motifs, emphasizing the fruit's central role in her transformation and continued authority. The scepter's design typically paralleled Hades' own royal staff, demonstrating their partnership in governing the underworld. Sculptural representations of Persephone from major Greek sanctuaries emphasize her mature dignity as Queen of the Dead, rather than her earlier identity as the innocent maiden core. The famous relief sculptures from the Eleusinian sanctuary show her as a fully adult goddess, wearing elaborate drapery that suggests both royal status and religious authority. Her facial expression in these works combines serenity with gravitas, reflecting her acceptance of her underworld responsibilities and her growth into divine maturity. The evolution of Persephone's artistic representation over time reflects changing Greek attitudes towards her mythology and religious significance. Earlier depictions from the 6th and 5th centuries BC often emphasize the dramatic contrast between her roles as core and as queen of the underworld, showing clear visual differences between her appearance in each capacity. Later Hellenistic and Roman works tend to present a more integrated image that combines elements of both identities, suggesting a more sophisticated understanding of her complex divine nature. Archaeological discoveries from underworld-themed sanctuaries across the Greek world have uncovered numerous votive offerings that illuminate popular understanding of Persephone's queenly authority. These offerings include miniature thrones, scepters, and crowns made from precious metals and decorated with underworld symbols. The consistent iconographic elements across different regions and time periods demonstrate widespread agreement about the visual symbols appropriate to Persephone's transformed status. The relationship between Persephone's seasonal absences and her underworld authority created complex theological questions that ancient sources addressed in various ways. Some traditions suggested that she maintained her queenly responsibilities even during her annual returns to the upper world, governing the underworld through supernatural means that transcended physical presence. Other accounts described temporary administrative arrangements where other deities or supernatural beings assumed her duties during her absences, ensuring continuity in underworld operations. The practical implications of Persephone's divided existence extended to questions about the timing and nature of death itself. Ancient sources occasionally describe seasonal variations in mortality rates or changes in the character of death that corresponded to Persephone's location. These accounts suggest that her presence or absence affected not only agricultural fertility, but also the fundamental processes that governed the transition between life and death. The moment Persephone's cries faded into the depths of the earth, Demeter's world transformed from divine serenity into cosmic catastrophe. According to the Homeric hymn to Demeter, the goddess heard her daughter's final scream echoing across the mountains and sea, but by the time she reached the meadow where Persephone had been gathering flowers, only trampled earth and scattered blossoms remained as evidence of the violent abduction. The hymn describes Demeter's immediate response as a frenzied search that would consume her divine energies for 9 days and nights, during which she neither ate ambrosia nor drank nectar, nor bathed her immortal body. Demeter's search began in the immediate vicinity of the abduction site, where she questioned every witness she could find. The hymn records her desperate inquiries to the daughters of Oceanus, who had been Persephone's companions, but their terror at witnessing the earth split open had rendered them nearly speechless. The goddess then expanded her search systematically across the known world, following every possible lead and investigating every rumour about her daughter's whereabouts. Ancient sources describe her travelling to remote mountain peaks, secluded valleys and distant islands, calling Persephone's name and demanding answers from any divine or mortal being she encountered. The geographical scope of Demeter's search, as recorded in various ancient sources, encompassed virtually the entire Mediterranean world known to the Greeks. The Homeric hymn mentions her travels to specific locations, including the peaks of high mountains and the depths of the sea, while later sources provide more detailed itineraries. Apollodorus records her journey to Thrace, where she questioned the local river gods and mountain nymphs. Pausanias describes her visits to numerous Greek cities, where local traditions preserved memories of the goddess's desperate inquiries and the sacred sites established to commemorate her passage. Archaeological evidence from across the Greek world supports these literary accounts of Demeter's widespread search. Sanctuaries dedicated to Demeter the Seeker, or Demeter the Wanderer, have been discovered in locations as diverse as Sicily, Crete, Asia Minor, and the Black Sea region. These sites typically contain votive offerings and inscriptions that reference the goddess's search for her lost daughter, demonstrating how local communities incorporated the mythological narrative into their own religious practices. The consistency of iconographic elements across these widely separated sites suggests coordinated religious traditions rather than independent local developments. The island of Sicily held particular significance in ancient accounts of Demeter's search, both because of its association with the abduction itself and because of the detailed local traditions preserved there. Diodorus Siculus provides extensive documentation of Sicilian beliefs about Demeter's activities on the island, describing specific locations where the goddess supposedly rested, made inquiries, or performed miraculous acts during her search. The city of Syracuse maintained elaborate festivals that reenacted portions of Demeter's journey, with processions following routes that local tradition claimed traced the goddess's actual path across the island. The Fountain of Arethusa in Syracuse became central to Sicilian versions of the search narrative. According to local tradition, this freshwater spring possessed the unique ability to communicate with underground waterways throughout the Mediterranean, making it an ideal source of information about events in the underworld. Ovid's account in the Metamorphoses describes Demeter questioning Arethusa directly, seeking any knowledge the spring might have gained from its subterranean connections. The fountain's response, revealing Persephone's fate as queen of the underworld, provided the first reliable information Demeter received about her daughter's location and circumstances. The psychological dimensions of Demeter's grief manifested in ways that transcended normal divine behaviour and approached the realm of cosmic dysfunction. Ancient sources describe the goddess as becoming increasingly dishevelled and wild in appearance as her search continued without success. The Homeric hymn notes that she covered her divine beauty with a dark cloak and wandered the earth in the guise of an aged, mortal woman, abandoning the magnificent appearance that normally characterized Olympic deities. This transformation reflected not merely emotional distress, but a fundamental rejection of her divine nature and responsibilities. Demeter's refusal to accept her usual divine prerogatives extended to her complete abandonment of her agricultural duties. The goddess who had previously ensured regular seasons, abundant harvests, and the fertility of all growing things now withdrew her favour entirely from the earth. Ancient sources describe this withdrawal as both conscious punishment and involuntary consequence of her overwhelming grief. The Homeric hymn presents it as a deliberate decision to force Zeus and the other gods to acknowledge her loss and take action to restore her daughter, while other accounts suggest that Demeter's emotional state made it impossible for her to maintain her normal cosmic functions. The agricultural consequences of Demeter's withdrawal began gradually but accelerated into a crisis that threatened all life on Earth. The Homeric hymn describes the progression of the famine in careful detail, beginning with the failure of newly planted seeds to germinate and extending to the withering of established crops and fruit trees. The earth, normally responsive to Demeter's divine influence, became barren and lifeless. Ancient sources emphasize that this was not merely a temporary drought or natural disaster, but a fundamental breakdown in the cosmic order that governed fertility and growth. The severity of the famine varied according to different ancient accounts, but all sources agree that it reached proportions that threatened human survival. Hesiod's account in the Theogony describes the earth becoming completely barren, with no grain growing anywhere and humanity facing imminent extinction from starvation. The Homeric hymn provides more detailed descriptions of the agricultural failure, noting that oxen dragged ploughs across fields in vain, white barley was scattered uselessly on the ground, and the entire human race would have perished if Zeus had not intervened. The political implications of the famine narrative reflected ancient Greek understanding of the relationship between divine favour and agricultural prosperity. In societies where the vast majority of the population depended directly on farming for survival, crop failures carried immediate political consequences that could destabilise entire regions. The myth of Demeter's withdrawal thus resonated powerfully with ancient audiences who understood from personal experience how agricultural crises could transform social and political structures virtually overnight. Ancient sources describe the famine as affecting not only food production, but also the religious practices that connected human communities to divine favour. The failure of crops meant that communities could no longer offer the traditional first-fruit sacrifices that maintained proper relationships with the gods. This created a vicious cycle where the absence of appropriate religious observances further alienated divine powers, potentially extending and deepening the agricultural crisis. The Homeric hymn specifically notes that the gods were deprived of their customary honours and sacrifices, creating additional pressure for divine intervention. The social consequences of the prolonged famine extended beyond immediate hunger to fundamental changes in human behaviour and community organisation. Ancient accounts describe the breakdown of normal social hierarchies as both rich and poor faced equal threat from starvation. Traditional economic relationships collapsed when agricultural products became unavailable at any price, forcing communities to develop emergency sharing arrangements and alternative survival strategies. These descriptions reflect genuine historical experiences of famine in the ancient world, where agricultural crises regularly produced similar social disruptions. Archaeological evidence from various Greek sites provides material confirmation of ancient beliefs about the connection between divine favour and agricultural success. Excavations at farming settlements throughout the Greek world have uncovered evidence of elaborate religious practices designed to ensure Demeter's continued blessing on crops and livestock. These findings include specialized storage facilities for sacred grain, ritual implements used in agricultural ceremonies, and votive offerings dedicated to the goddess at crucial points in the farming calendar. The religious response to agricultural crises in the ancient world typically involved intensified efforts to restore divine favour through increased sacrifices, purification rituals, and appeals to various deities associated with fertility and abundance. The myth of Demeter's withdrawal thus provided a theological framework for understanding why such efforts might prove ineffective during severe famines. If the goddess herself had withdrawn her favour due to personal grief, no amount of conventional religious observance could restore normal agricultural conditions until the underlying cause of her distress was addressed. Demeter's eventual arrival at Eleusis marked a crucial turning point in both her personal journey and the broader cosmic crisis caused by her withdrawal from her divine duties. According to the Homeric hymn, the goddess came to Eleusis disguised as an elderly woman named Doso, seeking employment as a nursemaid or household servant. This transformation represented more than mere concealment of her divine identity. It reflected her complete rejection of her cosmic responsibilities and her desire to experience the simple human relationships that her divine status normally precluded. The royal family of Eleusis, ruled by King Celeus and Queen Metanira, received the disguised goddess with the hospitality that ancient Greek culture demanded, towards strangers and suppliants. The Homeric hymn provides detailed descriptions of Demeter's integration into the royal household, where she assumed responsibility for caring for the infant prince Demephon. This domestic arrangement allowed the goddess to experience maternal feelings that partially compensated for her separation from Persephone, while also establishing the foundation for her eventual revelation of her true identity. The relationship between Demeter and the Eleusinian royal family developed gradually over an extended period, during which the goddess demonstrated unusual abilities that suggested her supernatural nature without explicitly revealing her divine identity. Ancient sources describe her success in caring for Demephon, who grew and flourished under her attention in ways that exceeded normal human development. The infant required no ordinary food, instead thriving on ambrosia that Demeter secretly provided, and his rapid growth and unusual beauty began to attract attention from other members of the household. Demeter's attempt to grant immortality to Demephon represents one of the most psychologically complex episodes in the entire myth cycle. According to the Homeric hymn, the goddess began secretly placing the infant in fire each night, burning away his mortal nature to prepare him for divine existence. This process reflected her desire to create a permanent connection to a mortal family that could partially replace her lost relationship with Persephone. The ritual also demonstrated her continued divine power despite her withdrawal from cosmic responsibilities. The discovery of Demeter's nighttime ritual by Queen Metanira created the crisis that forced the goddess to reveal her true identity. The Homeric hymn describes Metanira's horror at finding her infant son surrounded by flames, and her immediate assumption that the mysterious nursemaid intended harm to the child. Demeter's response to this interruption combined divine anger at the disruption of her sacred work with profound disappointment at the loss of her opportunity to create an immortal foster son who might have provided lasting comfort for her grief. The revelation scene, as described in the Homeric hymn, emphasizes both the terrifying power of divine anger and the tragic consequences of mortal limitations in understanding divine intentions. Demeter cast off her disguise of old age and revealed herself in her full divine majesty, filling the royal palace with supernatural light and inspiring overwhelming awe and terror in the mortal witnesses. Her explanation of her interrupted ritual revealed that Demephon had been on the verge of achieving immortality, but Metanira's interference had permanently destroyed this possibility. The theological implications of the failed immortalization attempt extend beyond the immediate narrative to broader questions about the relationship between divine and mortal existence. Ancient Greek religious thought generally maintained strict boundaries between these realms, with immortality reserved for beings born divine or specifically granted divine status through extraordinary circumstances. Demeter's attempt to transform Demephon represented a violation of these cosmic boundaries that reflected her disturbed mental state and her desperate desire to reconstruct the maternal relationships that gave meaning to her existence. The aftermath of Demeter's revelation established the foundation for the religious institutions that would make Eleusis famous throughout the ancient world. The goddess commanded the construction of a temple in her honor and the establishment of sacred rituals that would commemorate her presence in the city. These instructions reflected both her gratitude for the hospitality she had received and her recognition that her time in Eleusis had provided crucial emotional support during her period of greatest distress. The specific architectural requirements that Demeter provided for her Eleusinian temple, as recorded in the Homeric hymn, emphasized the building's function as a place of divine presence rather than merely a conventional religious structure. The goddess specified the temple's location on a hill overlooking the city, its orientation towards specific cardinal directions, and the inclusion of specialized chambers for religious ceremonies. Archaeological investigations at Eleusis have confirmed many details from these ancient accounts, revealing building phases that correspond closely to the mythological descriptions. The establishment of religious mysteries at Eleusis represented Demeter's most significant contribution to human religious experience during her period of residence in the city. These secret rituals, which would eventually attract initiates from across the Mediterranean world, promised participants special knowledge about death and the afterlife that could provide comfort and hope in the face of mortality. The content of the mysteries remained carefully guarded secrets throughout antiquity, but ancient sources suggest that they involved dramatic reenactments of Persephone's abduction and return, allowing initiates to experience symbolically the cosmic drama of death and rebirth. The relationship between Demeter's personal grief and the religious institutions she established at Eleusis demonstrates how individual divine experiences could generate lasting cultural and spiritual innovations. The goddess's time in the city provided her with direct experience of mortal concerns about death, separation, and loss that informed her development of religious practices specifically designed to address these universal human anxieties. The mysteries thus represented not merely commemorations of mythological events, but practical religious technologies for managing the psychological challenges of mortal existence. The pomegranate's significance in ancient Mediterranean cultures extended far beyond its role as mere sustenance, embodying complex theological concepts that made it the perfect vehicle for Persephone's binding to the underworld. Archaeological excavations across Greece, Anatolia, and the broader Mediterranean region have uncovered countless artistic representations of pomegranates in religious contexts, revealing a sophisticated symbolic system that connected the fruit to fundamental questions about fertility, mortality, and cosmic renewal. The fruit's distinctive characteristics, its tough exterior concealing hundreds of ruby-red seeds arranged in precise geometric patterns, created natural metaphors for hidden knowledge, contained potential and the relationship between death and regeneration. Ancient Greek religious texts consistently associated pomegranates with female fertility deities, particularly those governing agricultural cycles and seasonal transitions. Inscriptions from sanctuaries dedicated to Demeter, Persephone, Hera, and Aphrodite frequently mention pomegranate offerings, while temple inventories from sites like Samos and Argos record specialized vessels shaped like pomegranates used in religious ceremonies. The fruit appeared prominently in marriage rituals throughout the ancient world, where brides consumed pomegranate seeds to ensure fertility and successful childbearing. This widespread association with feminine reproductive power made the pomegranate an ideal symbol for Persephone's transformation from a maiden to married woman. The pomegranate's seasonal availability created additional layers of symbolic meaning that aligned perfectly with the mythological timing of Persephone's annual cycle. The fruit ripened in late summer and early autumn, precisely when ancient sources located Persephone's descent to the underworld. This natural timing suggested divine coordination between the agricultural calendar and the cosmic drama of death and rebirth. Ancient farmers recognized that pomegranate harvest marked the transition from the growing season to the dormant period, when seeds lay buried in dark earth, awaiting spring's return, a pattern that directly paralleled Persephone's own cyclical journey between worlds. The internal structure of pomegranates provided ancient observers with compelling visual metaphors for theological concepts that were otherwise difficult to express. The fruit's numerous seeds, each surrounded by translucent red flesh, suggested individual souls contained within the cosmic order. Ancient Greek philosophers and religious thinkers drew connections between the pomegranate's internal organization and their understanding of how individual consciousness related to universal divine principles. The seed's arrangement in distinct chambers separated by white membranes created natural symbols for the different realms of existence and the boundaries that separated them. Archaeological discoveries from Minoan Crete have revealed some of the earliest Mediterranean representations of pomegranates in the religious contexts. Frescoes from the palace at Knossos, dating to approximately 1500 BC, show female figures holding pomegranates during what appear to be religious ceremonies. These images predate the development of classical Greek mythology by nearly a millennium, suggesting that the fruit's symbolic associations had extremely ancient roots in Mediterranean religious thought. The continuity of pomegranate symbolism from Bronze Age Crete through classical antiquity demonstrates the persistence of certain religious concepts across major cultural transitions. The consumption of food in the underworld carried profound theological implications that extended far beyond simple sustenance to fundamental questions about identity, belonging, and cosmic law. Ancient Greek religious thought maintained strict boundaries between different realms of existence, with specific rules governing transitions between the world of the living and the domain of the dead. These boundaries were not merely geographical but ontological, defining the essential nature of beings who inhabited different cosmic regions. The act of eating food from a particular realm created permanent connections that transcended temporary physical presence. Ancient sources consistently emphasized that the underworld operated according to different natural laws than the upper world, with food serving as a primary mechanism for establishing permanent residence. The Homeric hymn to Demeter explicitly states that anyone who consumed food in Hades' realm became bound to return there, regardless of their original nature or intentions. This principle applied equally to gods and mortals, demonstrating that even divine beings remained subject to certain cosmic laws that governed the fundamental structure of reality. The binding power of underworld food reflected ancient understanding of consumption as a transformative act that altered the essential nature of the consumer. The theological basis for these food taboos derived from ancient Greek concepts about the relationship between physical substance and spiritual identity. Ancient religious thought understood eating as more than mere nutrition. It represented a fundamental form of communion that created lasting connections between the consumer and the source of nourishment. When applied to food from the underworld, this principle meant that consumption created permanent bonds to the realm of the dead that could not be severed through simple departure or divine intervention. Ancient legal and religious texts provide extensive documentation of similar food taboos in various contexts throughout Greek culture. Participants in certain mystery religions were required to abstain from specific foods to maintain their ritual purity and connection to particular deities. Conversely, consumption of sacred foods during religious ceremonies created permanent bonds between initiates and the divine powers they served. These practices demonstrate that the concept of binding through consumption was not merely mythological but reflected genuine religious beliefs that influenced actual behavior throughout ancient Greek society. The specific mechanics of how pomegranate consumption bound Persephone to the underworld varied significantly across different ancient sources, reflecting evolving theological understanding and regional variations in religious practice. The Homeric hymn presents the most straightforward account, describing Hades secretly giving Persephone a pomegranate seed before her departure, ensuring her return to his realm. This version emphasizes Hades' cunning and premeditation, while portraying Persephone as an unwitting victim of divine manipulation. The hymn's account suggests that even minimal consumption, a single seed, was sufficient to create the binding connection. Later sources, particularly those from the Roman period, present more complex scenarios that grant Persephone greater agency in her fate. Ovid's account in the Metamorphoses describes Persephone eating pomegranate seeds voluntarily, driven by hunger during her time in the underworld. This version transforms her from a passive victim into an active participant who bears partial responsibility for her binding to Hades' realm. The shift in narrative emphasis reflects changing cultural attitudes toward female agency and moral responsibility that developed over the centuries between the composition of different sources. The question of how many pomegranate seeds Persephone consumed became a matter of significant theological debate in ancient sources, with different numbers carrying distinct symbolic and practical implications. The most common accounts specify either 3, 6, or 7 seeds, though some sources mention as few as 1 or as many as 12. These numerical variations were not merely arbitrary details, but reflected sophisticated theological reasoning about the relationship between the quantity consumed and the extent of binding to the underworld. The number 7 appears most frequently in ancient sources and carried particular significance in Greek religious thought. 7 represented completion and cosmic perfection in ancient numerical symbolism, making it an appropriate choice for describing an act that would permanently alter Persephone's divine nature. Sources that specify 7 seeds often connect this number to the 7 months that Persephone would spend in the underworld each year, creating a direct correspondence between the quantity consumed and the duration of her annual residence with Hades. Alternative accounts that mention 6 seeds typically correlate this number with a different division of the year, suggesting that Persephone spent 6 months in the underworld and 6 months in the upper world. This version created a more balanced arrangement that emphasized the equal importance of both phases of her annual cycle. Archaeological evidence from various Greek sites has uncovered artistic representations that show Persephone holding different numbers of pomegranate seeds, suggesting that local religious traditions maintained their own preferred versions of the story. The 3-seed tradition, found in several ancient sources, connected Persephone's binding to broader patterns of triple symbolism that permeated Greek religious thought. The number 3 appeared frequently in contexts involving transformation, transition, and the intersection of different realms of existence. 3 seeds could represent the 3 realms of the cosmos: heaven, earth, and underworld, or the 3 phases of feminine existence: maiden, wife, and mother. This symbolic richness made the 3-seed version particularly appealing to ancient religious thinkers who sought to connect Persephone's story to broader theological frameworks. Some ancient sources mention 12 seeds, connecting Persephone's consumption to the 12 months of the year and emphasizing the cosmic scope of her transformation. This version suggested that her binding to the underworld affected the entire annual cycle rather than merely a portion of it. The 12-seed tradition often appeared in sources that emphasized Persephone's role as a goddess of seasonal transitions who governed the entire agricultural calendar rather than simply the periods of growth and dormancy. The single-seed tradition, found primarily in early sources like the Homeric hymn, emphasized the minimal nature of Persephone's consumption while maintaining the absolute effectiveness of the binding. This version suggested that even the slightest connection to the underworld through food consumption was sufficient to create permanent obligations. The theological implication was that cosmic laws operated with mathematical precision, where quantity mattered less than the fundamental act of crossing established boundaries. The pomegranate's role in establishing the cyclical nature of Persephone's myth created one of the most sophisticated examples of seasonal symbolism in ancient Mediterranean religion. The fruit's consumption provided the mechanism that transformed what might have been a simple rescue narrative into a complex theological explanation for the annual cycle of agricultural growth and dormancy. This transformation reflected ancient Greek understanding of how individual mythological events could generate ongoing cosmic patterns that affected all subsequent existence. The cyclical implications of pomegranate consumption extended beyond simple seasonal alternation to encompass broader concepts about time, renewal, and the relationship between permanence and change. Ancient sources recognized that Persephone's annual return to the underworld was not merely repetitive but regenerative, with each cycle contributing to the ongoing renewal of natural fertility. The pomegranate seeds thus functioned as both the cause of her binding and the mechanism that ensured the continuation of life-sustaining seasonal patterns. Archaeological evidence from agricultural communities throughout the ancient Greek world demonstrates how local farming practices incorporated pomegranate symbolism into seasonal rituals and celebrations. Excavations at rural sanctuaries have uncovered specialized storage facilities for pomegranates, ritual vessels decorated with pomegranate motifs, and votive offerings that clearly connect the fruit to seasonal transitions. These findings suggest that the mythological significance of pomegranates in Persephone's story reflected and reinforced practical agricultural knowledge about seasonal timing and crop management. The connection between pomegranate consumption and seasonal patterns also influenced ancient Greek astronomical and calendrical systems. Several ancient sources describe how the timing of pomegranate harvests served as a natural calendar marker that helped communities coordinate their agricultural activities with the mythological timing of Persephone's descent. This practical application of mythological knowledge demonstrates how religious narratives functioned as sophisticated information storage and transmission systems that preserve crucial cultural knowledge across generations. The pomegranate's symbolic complexity reached its fullest expression in the context of ancient mystery religions, where the fruit's multiple meanings could be explored through elaborate ritual practices and theological instruction. The Eleusinian mysteries in particular made extensive use of pomegranate symbolism to convey complex teachings about death, rebirth, and the relationship between individual existence and cosmic order. Initiates received instruction in the fruit's various symbolic meanings and participated in ceremonies that reenacted Persephone's consumption of the seeds. Ancient sources describe specialized ritual vessels shaped like pomegranates that were used in mystery ceremonies to contain sacred substances or offerings. These vessels often featured removable sections that allowed priests to reveal the contents during dramatic moments in religious ceremonies, creating powerful visual metaphors for hidden knowledge and revealed truth. The vessel's design emphasized the pomegranate's role as a container for transformative substances that could alter the fundamental nature of those who consumed them. The influence of pomegranate symbolism extended beyond specifically religious contexts to affect ancient Greek art, literature, and philosophical thought. Artistic representations of pomegranates appeared in contexts ranging from funerary monuments to wedding decorations, always carrying connotations of transformation, renewal, and the complex relationship between life and death. Ancient philosophers used pomegranate metaphors to explore questions about unity and multiplicity, individual identity and cosmic belonging, and the nature of change and permanence in the physical world. The enduring power of pomegranate symbolism in Persephone's myth is derived from the fruit's ability to embody multiple layers of meaning simultaneously. As a natural object, it provided tangible connections to agricultural cycles and seasonal changes that affected everyone's daily life. As a religious symbol, it conveyed sophisticated theological concepts about divine law, cosmic order, and the relationship between different realms of existence. As a narrative device, it provided the mechanism that transformed a simple abduction story into a complex exploration of agency, responsibility, and the consequences of seemingly minor actions. The pomegranate's role in binding Persephone to the underworld thus functioned as more than a mere plot device. It served as a concentrated symbol that encoded fundamental ancient Greek beliefs about the nature of existence, the structure of the cosmos, and the relationship between individual choice and cosmic necessity. The fruit's consumption created not only narrative consequences, but theological implications that resonated throughout ancient Mediterranean religious thought and continue to influence interpretation of the myth in contemporary scholarship. The religious complex at Eleusis, located approximately 14 miles northwest of Athens, developed into the most significant mystery cult centre in the ancient Mediterranean world, drawing initiates from across the Greek-speaking regions and beyond. Archaeological excavations conducted throughout the 19th and 20th centuries have revealed a sophisticated sanctuary that evolved continuously from the Bronze Age through the Roman imperial period, with each successive civilization adding architectural elements and ritual innovations that enhance the site's sacred character. The sanctuary's central feature, the Telesterion or Hall of Initiation, could accommodate several thousand participants during the climactic ceremonies of the Greater Mysteries, making it one of the largest covered religious spaces in the ancient world. The physical layout of the Eleusinian sanctuary reflected the complex theological concepts underlying the mystery cult's teachings about death, rebirth, and divine favour. The sacred precinct was enclosed by massive fortification walls that served both defensive and symbolic purposes, creating a clear boundary between the profane world outside and the sacred space within. Visitors approached the sanctuary through the Greater Propylaea, an elaborate gateway structure modelled after the famous entrance to the Athenian Acropolis, which marked the beginning of their transition from ordinary consciousness to the heightened spiritual awareness required for mystery initiation. The Lesser Mysteries, celebrated annually in the spring month of Anthesterion, served as preparatory ceremonies that qualified participants for eventual admission to the Greater Mysteries. These preliminary rites took place at the sanctuary of Demeter and Kor in Agrae, a suburb of Athens located along the Ilissus River. Archaeological investigations at Agrae have uncovered temple foundations, ritual pools, and specialised chambers that provided the infrastructure necessary for the purification ceremonies that formed the core of the Lesser Mysteries. The spring timing of these rites aligned them with the mythological return of Persephone from the Underworld and the renewal of agricultural fertility that marked the beginning of the growing season. The purification rituals of the Lesser Mysteries involved both physical and spiritual cleansing that prepared initiates for their eventual encounter with the sacred drama of the Greater Mysteries. Ancient sources describe elaborate bathing ceremonies conducted in the sacred pools at Agrae, where participants underwent ritual washing that symbolically removed the spiritual contamination accumulated through ordinary mortal existence. These lustrations were accompanied by specific dietary restrictions, periods of fasting and abstinence from sexual activity that further enhanced the initiate's spiritual preparation. The sacrificial components of the Lesser Mysteries included offerings of young pigs, animals specifically associated with Demeter and agricultural fertility throughout the Greek world. The choice of pigs for these ceremonies reflected both practical and symbolic considerations. These animals were readily available to participants from various economic backgrounds, and their association with earth-dwelling creatures made them appropriate intermediaries between human supplicants and the chthonic deities who governed fertility and death. Archaeological excavations at Agrae have uncovered extensive deposits of pig bones that confirm ancient literary descriptions of these sacrificial practices. The Greater Mysteries, celebrated in the autumn month of Boedromion, represented the culmination of the Eleusinian religious experience and attracted participants from across the Mediterranean world. The timing of these ceremonies coincided with the mythological descent of Persephone to the Underworld and the beginning of the agricultural dormancy period that characterized winter in the Mediterranean climate. This seasonal alignment created powerful symbolic connections between the ritual experiences of human initiates and the cosmic drama of divine separation and reunion that formed the theological foundation of the mystery cult. The Greater Mysteries began with elaborate processions that transported sacred objects and ritual participants from Athens to Eleusis along the Sacred Way, a specially constructed road that connected the two cities. Archaeological surveys of this ancient highway have revealed way stations, shrines, and ceremonial structures that provided rest stops and opportunities for additional rituals during the day-long journey. The procession route passed through landscapes that held special significance in the Demeter-Persephone mythology, including locations where ancient tradition claimed the goddess had searched for her lost daughter. The sacred objects carried in these processions, known collectively as the Hiera, remained among the most carefully guarded secrets of the mystery cult throughout antiquity. Ancient sources provide only cryptic references to these items, describing them as objects of such sacred power that unauthorized viewing could result in divine punishment or death. Modern scholarly analysis of ancient artistic representations and literary allusions suggests that the Hiera may have included agricultural implements, ritual vessels, and symbolic representations of fertility and renewal that connected directly to the mythological narrative of Demeter and Persephone. The procession participants included not only the initiates themselves, but also specially trained religious officials who supervised the ceremonies and maintained the ritual traditions. The Hierophant, or chief priest of the mysteries, held hereditary office within the Eumolpid family and possessed exclusive authority to reveal the sacred teachings to qualified initiates. Archaeological inscriptions from Eleusis document the names and genealogies of numerous hierophants, demonstrating the continuity of religious leadership that preserved the mystery traditions across many centuries. The Deduchos, or torchbearer, served as the second-ranking official in the mystery hierarchy and belonged to the hereditary Charikes family. This office's primary responsibilities included maintaining the sacred fires that illuminated the nocturnal ceremonies and supervising the dramatic reenactments that form the climax of the greater mysteries. Ancient artistic representations frequently show the Deduchos holding elaborate torches decorated with religious symbols, emphasizing the importance of light symbolism in the mystery cult's theological framework. The Hierophantides, female priestesses who served Demeter and Persephone directly, played crucial roles in the ceremonies that involved the goddesses' feminine aspects. These priestesses maintained separate ritual traditions that complemented the activities supervised by their male colleagues, ensuring that the mystery cult adequately represented both masculine and feminine dimensions of divine power. Inscriptional evidence from Eleusis documents the names and activities of numerous Hierophantides, revealing their involvement in specialized ceremonies that remain poorly understood due to the secrecy that surrounded their specific functions. The architectural evolution of the Telesterion reflects the growing popularity and importance of the Eleusinian mysteries throughout ancient Greek and Roman history. The earliest structure, dating to the 7th century BC, consisted of a relatively simple rectangular hall with wooden supports and a thatched roof. Successive rebuilding projects expanded the building's capacity and enhanced its acoustic properties, culminating in the massive structure completed during the 5th century BC under Pericles' building program. This final version featured a complex system of interior columns arranged in a grid pattern that supported a roof covering approximately 54 metres by 52 metres, creating an enclosed space larger than most ancient temples. The interior design of the Telesterion emphasised the building's function as a theatre for religious drama rather than a conventional temple housing a divine statue. The hall contained rising tiers of stone benches arranged around a central performance area where the sacred dramas were enacted. This amphitheatre-like arrangement allowed thousands of initiates to observe the ceremonies simultaneously while maintaining the intimate atmosphere necessary for the transformative religious experiences that the mysteries promised to provide. Archaeological investigations within the Telesterion have uncovered evidence of elaborate stage machinery and special effects equipment that enhance the dramatic impact of the mystery ceremonies. Excavations have revealed underground chambers, hydraulic systems, and mechanical devices that could produce supernatural phenomena such as sudden appearances of divine figures, mysterious sounds, and dramatic lighting effects. These technological innovations demonstrate the sophisticated theatrical techniques employed to create overwhelming sensory experiences that convinced initiates of their direct contact with divine powers. The Anacteron, a small stone building located within the Telesterion, served as the most sacred space in the entire sanctuary and housed the holiest objects of the mystery cult. This structure, measuring approximately 9 metres by 12 metres, was accessible only to the Hierophant and contained the ultimate secrets of the Eleusinian religion. Ancient sources describe the Anacteron as the place where the most profound revelations occurred, but the specific nature of these experiences remained absolutely secret throughout antiquity and continues to puzzle modern scholars. The ritual drama enacted during the Greater Mysteries recreated the essential elements of the Demeter Persephone mythology through sophisticated theatrical presentations that allowed initiates to experience the divine narrative as active participants rather than passive observers. Ancient sources provide fragmentary descriptions of these ceremonies, suggesting that they included dramatic representations of Persephone's abduction, Demeter's grief and search, and the eventual reunion between mother and daughter. The emotional impact of these presentations was enhanced by the use of sacred music, elaborate costumes, and special effects that created overwhelming sensory experiences. The katabasis, or descent ceremony, appears to have formed a central component of the mystery drama, allowing initiates to experience symbolically Persephone's journey to the underworld and her transformation from innocent maiden to queen of the dead. Archaeological evidence suggests that portions of the telesterion were designed to represent different levels of the cosmos, with underground areas symbolizing the realm of Hades and elevated sections representing the upper world of light and life. Initiates may have moved through these spaces during the ceremonies, experiencing their own symbolic death and rebirth. The revelation of sacred objects during the climactic moments of the mystery ceremonies provided initiates with visual confirmation of the theological truths conveyed through the dramatic presentations. Ancient sources describe the Hierophant displaying the Hiera to the assembled initiates while proclaiming sacred formulas that explained their significance. The psychological impact of these revelations was intensified by the use of dramatic lighting, sacred music, and the heightened emotional state produced by the preceding ritual activities. The promise of blessed afterlife that attracted initiates to Eleusis differed significantly from conventional Greek beliefs about death and the fate of human souls. Traditional Greek religious thought generally described the afterlife as a shadowy existence in Hades, where the dead continued as insubstantial shades with limited consciousness and no hope of improvement. The Eleusinian mysteries offered an alternative vision where properly initiated souls could achieve privileged status in the underworld and eventual reunion with divine powers. Ancient testimonials from mystery initiates provide glimpses of the psychological transformation that the Eleusinian experience produced in participants. Cicero, writing in the 1st century BC, described the mysteries as providing comfort and hope that made death less fearsome and life more meaningful. Similar testimonials from other ancient authors emphasize the mystery's ability to provide certainty about divine favour and posthumous reward that conventional religious practices could not guarantee. The influence of Eleusinian theology on broader Greek religious thought appears in various philosophical and literary works that incorporate mystery concepts into their discussions of death, immortality, and divine justice. Plato's writings contain numerous references to mystery religion ideas, particularly in his discussions of the soul's immortality and the possibility of achieving blessed afterlife through philosophical purification. These philosophical adaptations demonstrate how mystery religion concepts influenced intellectual development that extended far beyond the specific confines of the Eleusinian sanctuary. The archaeological record at Eleusis preserves extensive evidence of the material culture associated with mystery religion practices, including specialized ritual vessels, votive offerings, and architectural features designed to enhance religious experiences. Excavations have uncovered thousands of ceramic vessels decorated with scenes from the Demeter Persephone mythology, demonstrating how artistic representations reinforce the theological messages conveyed through ritual activities. These artifacts provide crucial evidence for reconstructing the visual and material dimensions of mystery religion practices that ancient literary sources describe only in general terms. The international character of the Eleusinian mysteries appears clearly in inscriptional evidence documenting initiates from across the Mediterranean world. Dedication inscriptions at the sanctuary record participants from locations as distant as the Black Sea colonies, southern Italy, and Asia Minor, demonstrating the cult's appeal to diverse cultural and ethnic groups. This geographical diversity reflects both the universal human concerns addressed by mystery religion teachings and the effective missionary activities that spread Eleusinian influence throughout the ancient world. The relationship between the Eleusinian mysteries and Athenian political power created complex dynamics that influenced both religious and secular developments throughout classical antiquity. Athens maintained political control over the sanctuary and derived significant economic benefits from the international pilgrimage traffic that the mysteries generated. This political dimension sometimes created tensions between religious and secular authorities, particularly when mystery religion teachings conflicted with conventional civic religious obligations, or when foreign initiates claimed religious privileges that challenged Athenian legal jurisdiction. The transformation of Persephone from the innocent flower-gathering maiden core into the formidable sovereign of the dead represents one of the most psychologically complex character developments in ancient mythology. This evolution appears most clearly in the progression of classical literature from the 8th century BC through the Roman imperial period, where successive generations of poets, playwrights, and religious writers gradually developed increasingly sophisticated portrayals of her divine authority and judicial capabilities. The earliest sources, particularly the Homeric hymn to Demeter, present Persephone primarily as a victim whose agency remains limited even after her elevation to queenly status. However, later classical authors began depicting her as an active participant in underworld governance, who exercised genuine authority over the fates of both divine and mortal beings. Aeschylus, writing in the 5th century BC, provides some of the earliest dramatic evidence for Persephone's judicial authority in his lost play, The Weighing of Souls, fragments of which survive in later quotations and papyrus discoveries. These fragments describe Persephone presiding alongside Hades over a cosmic tribunal that determined the posthumous fates of heroic figures who had committed ambiguous moral acts during their lifetimes. The playwright's characterization emphasizes her ability to perceive subtle distinctions between different types of moral failure and to craft punishments that address the specific nature of each individual's transgressions. Sophocles further developed this judicial characterization in his Oedipus at Colonus, where Persephone appears as a deity who can grant sanctuary to those who have suffered unjustly during their mortal existence. The play's treatment of her authority suggests that she possessed special insight into cases involving family relationships gone wrong, drawing on her own experiences of separation and forced marriage to understand the complexities of kinship obligations and their violation. This specialization in family-related cases would become a recurring theme in later literary treatments of her underworld role. Euripides' fragmentary Pirithous presents perhaps the most sophisticated early portrayal of Persephone's judicial reasoning, showing her carefully weighing the competing claims of justice and mercy when Heracles arrives seeking permission to free Theseus and Pirithous from their underworld imprisonment. The playwright's Persephone demonstrates detailed knowledge of both heroes' motivations and past actions, suggesting that her judicial authority extended beyond simple punishment to include comprehensive understanding of mortal psychology and moral development. Her decision to free Theseus while maintaining Pirithous' captivity reflects sophisticated ethical reasoning that considers both the severity of offences and the possibility of redemption. The Hellenistic period produced increasingly elaborate literary portrayals of Persephone's underworld authority, with poets like Callimachus and Apollonius of Rhodes developing detailed descriptions of her administrative responsibilities and judicial procedures. Callimachus's Hymn to Demeter includes extended passages describing Persephone's daily routine as Queen of the Dead, showing her reviewing cases brought by various underworld officials, consulting with specialized tribunals of deceased judges, and personally investigating complex moral questions that required divine intervention. These accounts suggest a highly bureaucratized underworld administration where Persephone functioned as both supreme judicial authority and chief executive officer. Roman poets further elaborated these themes while adapting them to Roman legal and administrative concepts that emphasize systematic procedure and institutional authority. Virgil's Aeneid presents Persephone as the ultimate arbiter of access to different regions of the underworld, with the power to grant or deny passage to souls seeking to reach the illicitous Elysian fields or other specialized areas. His characterization emphasizes her role as guardian of cosmic justice who ensures that posthumous rewards and punishments align with divine law rather than arbitrary preference or political consideration. Ovid's Metamorphoses provides the most detailed Roman account of Persephone's judicial activities, describing her involvement in numerous cases involving mortals who had been transformed by divine power during their lifetimes. His Persephone appears as a specialist in cases involving transformation and identity change, drawing on her own experience of radical, personal transformation to understand the psychological and spiritual challenges faced by others who had undergone similar changes. The poet's treatment suggests that her authority extended to reversing or modifying transformations when justice required such intervention. The judicial procedures attributed to Persephone in classical literature reflect sophisticated understanding of legal principles that paralleled contemporary developments in Greek and Roman law. Ancient sources describe her as requiring detailed testimony from multiple witnesses before rendering judgments, consulting with panels of expert advisors on technical questions, and maintaining careful records of precedent decisions that guided future cases. These procedural elements suggest that ancient writers understood underworld justice as operating according to systematic principles rather than arbitrary divine whim. Archaeological evidence from various underworld-themed sanctuaries provides material confirmation of beliefs about Persephone's judicial authority. Excavations at sites associated with chthonic worship have uncovered numerous curse tablets and legal appeals addressed specifically to Persephone, requesting her intervention in earthly disputes or her judgment on moral questions that mortal courts could not resolve. These tablets typically invoke her authority as Queen of the Dead and Judge of Souls, emphasizing her role as the ultimate arbiter of justice that transcended the limitations of mortal legal systems. The relationship between Persephone and other chthonic deities reveals a complex supernatural hierarchy that governed different aspects of death and posthumous existence. Ancient sources consistently present her as holding higher rank than most other underworld powers, while remaining subordinate to Hades in matters involving the fundamental structure and administration of his realm. This arrangement created opportunities for both cooperation and conflict that ancient writers exploited to explore themes about authority, jurisdiction, and the proper exercise of divine power. Hecate, the goddess of magic and crossroads, maintained particularly complex relationships with Persephone that evolved significantly throughout classical antiquity. Early sources present Hecate primarily as Persephone's companion and guide during her transitions between the upper and lower worlds, emphasizing their shared connection to liminal spaces and transformative experiences. The Homeric hymn describes Hecate as the only deity who heard Persephone's cries during her abduction, establishing her as a witness to the foundational trauma that shaped Persephone's subsequent development. Later sources developed increasingly sophisticated theological frameworks for understanding the relationship between these two goddesses, with many accounts presenting them as complementary aspects of feminine divine power that governed different phases of existence and transformation. Hecate's association with magic and supernatural knowledge complemented Persephone's authority over death and rebirth, creating a partnership that could address the full range of challenges faced by mortals seeking divine intervention in matters involving life transitions. Archaeological discoveries from sites where both goddesses received worship reveal elaborate ritual practices that honoured their partnership while maintaining distinct ceremonial traditions for each deity. Excavations at crossroads sanctuaries throughout the Greek world have uncovered offering deposits that include materials specifically associated with both Persephone and Hecate, suggesting coordinated worship practices that recognize their interconnected spheres of influence. These findings demonstrate how theological concepts about divine relationships translated into practical religious activities that shaped community worship patterns. The Erinyes, or Furies, occupied another crucial position within the chthonic pantheon that brought them into regular contact with Persephone's judicial authority. These ancient deities of vengeance and retribution predated the Olympian religious system and maintained specialized responsibilities for punishing crimes that violated fundamental moral and social boundaries. Their relationship with Persephone involved complex negotiations about jurisdiction and appropriate punishment that reflected broader tensions between older and newer forms of divine justice. Ancient literary sources describe various scenarios where Persephone's authority as Queen of the Dead conflicted with the Erinyes' traditional prerogatives as enforcers of blood guilt and family obligations. Aeschylus's Oresteia trilogy provides the most detailed exploration of these jurisdictional conflicts, showing how competing claims about divine authority required resolution through formal divine councils and negotiated settlements. The playwright's treatment suggests that Persephone's newer authority as Underworld Queen gradually superseded older forms of chthonic justice, while incorporating their essential functions into more systematic judicial procedures. The relationship between Persephone and Thanatos, the personification of death itself, reveals another dimension of underworld administration that required careful coordination between different divine functions. Ancient sources present Thanatos as responsible for the actual moment of death and the initial transition of souls from life to posthumous existence, while Persephone's authority began with the soul's arrival in the underworld proper. This division of responsibilities created potential areas of overlap and conflict that required ongoing negotiation and cooperation. Hypnos, the god of sleep and brother of Thanatos, maintained connections to Persephone's realm through his role in producing the unconscious states that temporarily separated souls from their physical bodies. Ancient dream literature frequently describes encounters with Persephone during sleep experiences, suggesting that her authority extended to governing certain types of visionary and prophetic experiences that occurred during altered states of consciousness. These connections created additional opportunities for cooperation between different chthonic powers, while also establishing Persephone's influence over experiences that bridge the boundaries between life and death. The cult epithets associated with Persephone reveal the geographical and temporal variations in how different communities understood and honoured her divine authority. The title Despoina, meaning mistress or lady, appears most frequently in Arcadian inscriptions and religious texts, where it served as both a respectful address and a recognition of her supreme authority within her domain. This epithet's usage in Arcadia, a region known for maintaining particularly ancient religious traditions, suggests that recognition of Persephone's sovereign status had very early roots in Greek religious development. Archaeological investigations in Arcadia have uncovered numerous sanctuary sites where Persephone received worship under the Despoina title, with evidence suggesting that these religious practices incorporated elements that predated classical Greek mythology. The ritual practices at these sites often emphasize Persephone's connection to agricultural fertility and seasonal cycles, rather than her underworld associations, indicating that the Despoina epithet originally applied to her role as a vegetation goddess before her mythological marriage to Hades transformed her primary identity. The core epithet, meaning simply maiden, preserved memory of Persephone's pre-marriage identity, while also serving as a euphemistic reference that avoided directly naming her in contexts where such naming might be considered dangerous or inappropriate. Ancient Greek religious practice often employed euphemistic epithets when referring to chthonic deities, reflecting beliefs that direct naming could attract unwanted attention from potentially dangerous supernatural powers. The continued use of the core epithet throughout classical antiquity demonstrates the persistence of earlier religious concepts, even after the development of more complex mythological narratives. Regional variations in the application of the core epithet reveal different community understandings of Persephone's essential nature and primary functions. Athenian usage typically emphasized her connection to the Eleusinian mysteries and her role in providing hope for blessed afterlife, while Sicilian communities focused more on her agricultural associations and her seasonal absences and returns. These variations demonstrate how local religious traditions adapted universal mythological themes to address specific community needs and concerns. The Roman epithet Proserpina represents more than simple linguistic translation, embodying distinctly Roman theological concepts about divine authority and cosmic order. Roman religious thought emphasized systematic administration and institutional continuity in ways that differed significantly from Greek approaches to divine power, and these differences appear clearly in Roman treatments of Proserpina's underworld authority. Roman sources consistently present her as operating within clearly defined bureaucratic structures that paralleled earthly governmental institutions, with specialized subordinates responsible for different aspects of underworld administration. Roman artistic representations of Proserpina emphasize her role as a judicial figure who rendered decisions based on systematic legal principles rather than personal preference or emotional response. These images typically show her holding scales, scrolls, or other symbols of legal authority, while her clothing and posture suggest the dignified bearing appropriate to high judicial office. The consistent iconographic elements across different regions and time periods demonstrate coordinated efforts to promote particular understandings of her divine authority that aligned with Roman political and legal values. The geographical distribution of different epithets provides crucial evidence for understanding how Persephone's cult spread throughout the Mediterranean world and adapted to local religious traditions. Inscriptional evidence from Greek colonies in southern Italy and Sicily reveals complex patterns of epithet usage that reflect both the religious traditions that colonists brought from their homeland and the influences they encountered from indigenous populations. These hybrid religious practices created new forms of Persephone worship that combined elements from multiple cultural traditions. The temporal evolution of epithet usage demonstrates how changing political and cultural circumstances affected religious understanding of Persephone's divine nature and authority. Early archaic inscriptions typically employ simple descriptive epithets that emphasize her basic functions and relationships, while later classical and Hellenistic sources develop increasingly elaborate titles that reflect more sophisticated theological concepts. This evolution parallels broader developments in Greek religious thought that produced more systematic and philosophically sophisticated approaches to understanding divine nature and cosmic order. The influence of mystery religion practices on epithet development appears clearly in the specialized titles associated with Persephone's role in providing posthumous salvation and blessed afterlife. Inscriptions from mystery cult centers frequently employ epithets that emphasize her power to transform the posthumous experiences of properly initiated souls, with titles like Savior, Liberator, and Guide, reflecting beliefs about her ability to intervene directly in individual spiritual development. These specialized epithets demonstrate how particular religious communities develop distinctive understandings of divine authority that serve their specific spiritual needs and theological commitments. The mythological framework of Persephone's annual journey between the upper and lower worlds provided ancient Greek communities with a sophisticated explanatory system for understanding the complex rhythms of Mediterranean agricultural cycles. Unlike the more predictable seasonal patterns found in northern European climates, Mediterranean agriculture operated according to intricate cycles that required precise timing of planting, cultivation, and harvest activities to maximize productivity while minimizing risk from unpredictable weather patterns. The myth's structure, with its emphasis on periods of abundance alternating with times of scarcity and dormancy, aligned perfectly with the practical realities faced by farmers throughout the Greek world. Archaeological investigations at agricultural sites across the Mediterranean have revealed extensive evidence of ritual practices that synchronized farming activities with the mythological timing of Persephone's movements. Excavations at rural sanctuaries in Attica, the Peloponnese, and the Greek colonies of southern Italy have uncovered specialized storage facilities for grain, ritual implements used in planting ceremonies, and votive offerings that clearly connect agricultural success to divine favor from Demeter and Persephone. These findings demonstrate how mythological narratives functioned as practical agricultural calendars that preserved crucial timing information across generations of farmers. The Mediterranean climate's distinctive pattern of wet winters and dry summers created agricultural challenges that required sophisticated understanding of optimal planting and harvesting schedules. Ancient farmers recognized that successful grain cultivation depended on precise coordination between seasonal rainfall patterns, soil temperature fluctuations, and the natural cycles of plant growth and dormancy. The Persephone myth encoded this practical knowledge within a memorable narrative structure that could be transmitted orally across generations while maintaining accuracy in the essential timing information. Ancient agricultural texts from writers like Hesiod and Theophrastus reveal how the mythological calendar influenced practical farming decisions throughout the Greek world. Hesiod's Works and Days contains numerous references to agricultural activities that should be performed when specific mythological events occurred, with planting schedules coordinated to coincide with Persephone's descent to the Underworld and harvest activities timed to align with her return to the upper world. These connections demonstrate how religious narratives served as sophisticated information storage systems that preserved crucial agricultural knowledge within memorable cultural frameworks. The timing of Persephone's descent, traditionally located in late summer or early autumn, corresponded precisely with the period when Mediterranean farmers needed to prepare their fields for winter planting. Ancient sources describe elaborate ceremonies that marked this transition, with communities gathering to perform rituals that honoured both the completion of the previous year's agricultural cycle and the beginning of preparations for the coming year's crops. Archaeological evidence from rural sanctuaries reveals specialized ritual vessels, agricultural implements dedicated to the goddesses, and offering deposits that confirm the widespread practice of these seasonal ceremonies. The autumn timing also aligned with crucial decisions about seed selection and storage that would determine the success of the following year's harvest. Ancient farmers understood that the quality and viability of seeds deteriorated over time, making it essential to identify and preserve the best specimens from each harvest for use in subsequent planting seasons. The mythological framework provided a religious context for these practical activities, with ceremonies honouring Persephone's transformation from maiden to queen paralleling the transformation of harvested grain from food into seed for future crops. The spring return of Persephone coincided with the critical period when stored seeds began their transformation into new plant growth, marking the transition from the dormant winter period to the active growing season. Ancient agricultural communities recognized this timing as crucial for determining the success of their entire agricultural year, since weather conditions and soil preparation during this period directly affected crop yields and harvest quality. The mythological celebration of Persephone's reunion with Demeter provided a religious framework for the community activities necessary to ensure successful spring planting. The Thesmophoria, one of the most widespread and significant festivals dedicated to Demeter and Persephone, reveals the sophisticated integration of religious observance with practical agricultural needs that characterized ancient Greek farming communities. This women-only festival, celebrated annually in the autumn month of Pyanepsion, combined elaborate religious ceremonies with practical activities that supported agricultural success and community fertility. Archaeological investigations at Thesmophorian sites throughout the Greek world have uncovered extensive evidence of the festival's agricultural connections, including specialized storage facilities for grain offerings, ritual implements used in fertility ceremonies, and architectural features designed to accommodate the festival's unique requirements. The festival's 3-day structure reflected the mythological narrative of Persephone's abduction, Demeter's grief, and their eventual reunion, while also incorporating practical activities that served essential agricultural and social functions. The first day, called a nodos or ascent, involved processions that brought participants to the festival site and established the sacred space necessary for the ceremonies. Archaeological evidence suggests that these processions followed routes that connected urban centres with rural agricultural areas, reinforcing the festival's role in linking city and countryside through shared religious observances. The second day, nestia or fasting, required participants to abstain from food and engage in mourning rituals that commemorated Demeter's grief over her lost daughter. This fasting period served multiple practical functions beyond its religious significance, including the purification of participants and the creation of heightened spiritual awareness that enhanced the impact of subsequent ritual activities. Ancient medical texts suggest that the timing and duration of the Thesmophoria fast were carefully calculated to produce specific physiological effects that supported the festival's fertility-enhancing goals. The third day, Caligonea, or Beautiful Birth, celebrated the restoration of fertility and abundance through ceremonies that honoured both divine and human reproductive capacity. Archaeological discoveries at Thesmophorian sites have revealed specialised chambers called megara, underground storage areas where organic materials were deposited during previous festivals and allowed to decompose over the course of the year. The resulting compost was retrieved during Caligonea ceremonies and distributed to participants for use in their agricultural activities, creating direct practical benefits that reinforce beliefs about the festival's efficacy. The organic materials deposited in the megara included not only agricultural products like grain and fruit, but also sacrificial animals, particularly pigs, whose decomposition contributed to the fertility-enhancing properties of the retrieved compost. Ancient sources describe elaborate ceremonies surrounding the deposition and retrieval of these materials, with specialized priestesses responsible for maintaining the megara and ensuring that the decomposition process proceeded according to traditional practices. The scientific accuracy of these ancient composting techniques demonstrates sophisticated understanding of soil fertility and plant nutrition that paralleled contemporary developments in agricultural technology. Regional variations in Thesmophoria practices reveal how different communities adapted the basic festival structure to address local agricultural conditions and cultural preferences. Sicilian celebrations emphasized the festival's connections to grain cultivation and incorporated elaborate bread-making ceremonies that honored Demeter's role as the provider of agricultural abundance. Athenian observances focused more on the festival's political and social dimensions, with participation serving as a marker of citizenship status and community membership that reinforced social hierarchies and political allegiances. Archaeological investigations at the Thesmophorion in Athens have uncovered extensive evidence of the festival's elaborate organisation and substantial economic impact. The site contained multiple temple buildings, residential quarters for participants, dining facilities capable of accommodating hundreds of women, and specialised storage areas for the supplies necessary to support the 3-day celebration. Inscriptional evidence reveals the complex administrative arrangements required to coordinate the festival, including detailed regulations about participant qualifications, financial contributions, and behavioural expectations. The economic dimensions of the Thesmophoria extended beyond the immediate costs of the festival itself to encompass broader impacts on agricultural productivity and community prosperity. Ancient sources describe how successful festival celebrations were believed to ensure abundant harvests and general prosperity for the entire community. while failures in festival organisation or execution could result in agricultural disasters and economic hardship. These beliefs created strong incentives for communities to invest substantial resources in Thesmophoria celebrations, contributing to the festival's elaborate development and widespread popularity. The Haloa festival, celebrated in the winter month of Poseidon, provided another crucial connection between Persephone worship and agricultural cycles, focusing specifically on the wine and olive harvests that characterized late autumn and early winter agricultural activities. This festival honored both Demeter and Dionysus, reflecting the interconnected nature of different agricultural products and the divine powers that governed their successful cultivation. Archaeological evidence from Haloa celebration sites reveals specialized wine storage facilities, olive pressing equipment, and ritual vessels designed for ceremonies involving fermented beverages. The timing of the Haloa coincided with crucial decisions about wine fermentation and olive oil production that would determine the quality and economic value of these important agricultural products. Ancient vintners and olive growers understood that the success of fermentation and pressing processes depended on precise timing, temperature control, and ritual observances that honoured the divine powers responsible for these transformative processes. The festival provided a religious framework for coordinating these activities, while also serving as a marketplace where producers could display their products and negotiate sales agreements. The festival's emphasis on fertility and sexual symbolism reflected ancient understanding of the connections between human reproduction, agricultural abundance, and divine favour. Archaeological discoveries at Haloa sites have uncovered numerous phallic symbols, fertility figurines, and artistic representations of sexual activity that demonstrate the festival's explicit celebration of reproductive capacity in both human and agricultural contexts. These findings confirm ancient literary descriptions of the festival's ribald character, while also revealing the sophisticated theological concepts that connected sexual fertility with agricultural productivity. The Kalamaya festival, celebrated in various locations throughout the Greek world, focused specifically on the grain harvest and the transformation of raw cereals into processed food products. This festival's timing varied according to local agricultural conditions, but it typically occurred during the late spring or early summer period, when grain crops reached maturity and required immediate harvesting to prevent losses from weather damage or pest infestation. Archaeological investigations at rural sanctuaries associated with Kalamaya celebrations have uncovered extensive evidence of communal grain processing activities, including grinding stones, storage vessels, and baking facilities. The festival's ceremonies emphasized the sacred nature of grain transformation processes and the divine powers that governed the conversion of raw agricultural products into nourishing food. Ancient sources describe elaborate rituals involving the first grinding of newly harvested grain, the preparation of sacred breads and cakes, and the distribution of processed grain products to community members. These activities served both religious and practical functions, ensuring that grain processing occurred under divine protection, while also providing opportunities for communities to coordinate their harvest activities and share resources. Regional variations in grain cultivation practices influenced the specific forms that Kalamaya celebrations took in different locations. Communities that specialized in wheat production developed ceremonies that emphasized the grain's associations with civilized life and urban prosperity, while areas that relied more heavily on barley cultivation focused on the grain's connections to athletic competition and military strength. These variations demonstrate how local agricultural conditions shaped religious practices while maintaining connections to broader mythological frameworks. Beyond the major festivals, agricultural communities throughout the Greek world maintained numerous smaller observances that connected daily farming activities to the mythological cycles of Persephone and Demeter. Archaeological evidence reveals specialized shrines located within agricultural fields, ritual deposits associated with planting and harvesting activities, and votive offerings that document farmers' ongoing relationships with the agricultural deities. These findings demonstrate how religious observance permeated all aspects of agricultural life, rather than being confined to specific festival periods. The practice of offering first fruits to Demeter and Persephone appears consistently across the Greek world, with archaeological evidence documenting specialized storage facilities for these offerings at rural sanctuaries. Ancient sources describe elaborate ceremonies involving the dedication of the first and best products from each harvest, with these offerings serving both as expressions of gratitude for divine favour and as insurance against future agricultural disasters. The economic impact of these offerings was substantial, with major sanctuaries accumulating significant wealth through the systematic collection of agricultural products. Seed blessing ceremonies provided another crucial connection between religious observance and practical agricultural activities. Ancient farmers understood that seed quality directly determined crop success, making the selection and treatment of planting material a matter of fundamental importance for community survival. Religious ceremonies that invoke divine protection for seeds served both psychological and practical functions, providing farmers with confidence in their planting decisions while also creating opportunities for communities to share information about successful seed varieties and cultivation techniques. The geographical variations in Persephone's seasonal interpretations reflect the diverse agricultural conditions found throughout the Mediterranean world and the adaptability of mythological frameworks to local environmental circumstances. In the grain-producing regions of Sicily and southern Italy, the myth emphasized Persephone's role in governing cereal cultivation and the annual cycles of planting, growth, and harvest that characterized wheat and barley production. Archaeological evidence from these regions reveals extensive religious infrastructure dedicated to grain-focused worship, including specialized storage facilities, processing equipment, and ritual implements designed for cereal-related ceremonies. The volcanic regions of southern Italy and Sicily developed particular interpretations of the Persephone myth that incorporated local geological features into the mythological narrative. Communities near Mount Etna and Vesuvius understood the Earth's periodic eruptions as manifestations of Persephone's movements between the upper and lower worlds, with volcanic activity serving as evidence of the ongoing cosmic drama that governed seasonal cycles. Archaeological investigations at volcanic sites have uncovered sanctuaries positioned to take advantage of geological features, with temples and altars located near caves, fissures, and other openings that provided symbolic access to the underworld. The wine-producing regions of the Greek islands developed interpretations of the myth that emphasized Persephone's connections to viticulture and the complex processes involved in grape cultivation and wine production. These communities understood the annual cycle of vine growth, fruit development, harvest, and dormancy as reflecting Persephone's own cyclical journey between different states of existence. Archaeological evidence from wine-producing areas reveals specialized religious infrastructure, including wine storage facilities integrated with sanctuary complexes, ritual vessels designed for wine offerings, and artistic representations that combine viticultural and mythological themes. The olive-growing regions of Attica and the Peloponnese interpreted the Persephone myth in ways that highlighted the olive tree's distinctive characteristics and cultivation requirements. Unlike annual crops that completed their entire life cycle within a single growing season, olive trees required multiple years to reach maturity and could remain productive for centuries under proper care. This agricultural reality influenced local understanding of Persephone's cyclical nature, with communities emphasizing the long-term aspects of her divine authority and the multi-generational benefits that resulted from maintaining proper relationships with the agricultural deities. Mountain communities throughout the Greek world developed interpretations of the myth that reflected the unique challenges of high-altitude agriculture and the specialized crops that thrived in these environments. Archaeological investigations in mountainous regions have uncovered evidence of religious practices that honored Persephone's role in governing the growth cycles of alpine plants, including medicinal herbs, mountain fruits, and specialized grains adapted to high-altitude conditions. These communities often emphasize Persephone's connections to wild plants and uncultivated spaces, reflecting their reliance on foraging and semi-domesticated agriculture. Coastal communities integrated maritime elements into their understanding of Persephone's seasonal cycles, recognizing connections between agricultural timing and the seasonal patterns that governed fishing, sea travel, and maritime trade. Archaeological evidence from coastal sanctuaries reveals ritual practices that honoured both agricultural and maritime deities, with ceremonies that coordinated land-based and sea-based economic activities according to seasonal patterns that reflected mythological narratives. These practices demonstrate how communities with diverse economic foundations could integrate different aspects of seasonal mythology into coherent religious systems. The Roman appropriation of Greek mythological traditions underwent systematic transformation during the late Republican and early imperial periods, with the Persephone myth experiencing particularly significant adaptations that reflected distinctly Roman cultural values and political needs. When Roman poets and religious authorities encountered the Greek Persephone narrative, they found a story that required substantial modification to align with Roman concepts of divine authority, family structure, and cosmic order. The resulting figure of Proserpina emerged as a distinctly Roman goddess whose characteristics, while clearly derived from Greek precedents, embodied specifically Roman theological and political concepts that served the expanding empire's ideological requirements. Ovid's treatment of the Proserpina myth in the Metamorphoses, composed between 2 and 8 AD during Augustus's reign, represents the most influential Roman adaptation of the Greek narrative. Writing for an audience that included both traditional Roman aristocrats and newly enfranchised citizens from across the Mediterranean world, Ovid crafted a version that maintained the essential mythological structure while incorporating Roman legal concepts, social values, and political imagery that resonated with contemporary imperial ideology. His Proserpina appears as a figure whose transformation from innocent maiden to underworld queen paralleled the Roman understanding of how individual identity could be reshaped through institutional authority and legal obligation. Ovid's geographical precision in locating the abduction in Sicily reflected Roman administrative control over the island and the empire's systematic approach to incorporating local religious traditions into broader imperial frameworks. His detailed descriptions of Sicilian landscapes, particularly the area around Lake Pergus near Enna, demonstrated Roman familiarity with provincial territories, while also establishing clear connections between mythological events and actual locations under Roman governance. This geographical specificity served political purposes by reinforcing Roman claims to territorial control, while simultaneously honouring local religious traditions that predated Roman conquest. The Roman poet's characterization of the divine participants reveals distinctly Roman perspectives on authority relationships and family dynamics. His Jupiter appears as a calculating political leader, whose decision to arrange Proserpina's marriage reflects the Roman aristocratic practice of using matrimonial alliances to strengthen political networks and maintain stability among powerful families. This interpretation transformed Zeus's somewhat arbitrary exercise of divine authority in Greek sources into a systematic political strategy that Roman audiences would recognize and understand as necessary for maintaining cosmic order. Ovid's Pluto emerges as a more sympathetic figure than his Greek counterpart, driven by genuine passion rather than mere desire for a suitable bride. The Roman poet's emphasis on Pluto's emotional vulnerability and his desperate attempts to win Proserpina's affection reflected Roman literary preferences for psychological complexity and emotional authenticity. This characterization also aligned with Roman marriage customs that increasingly emphasized mutual affection and companionship between spouses, even in arrangements that served primarily political or economic functions. Virgil's references to Proserpine in the Aeneid, while less extensive than Ovid's treatment, reveal how the myth could be integrated into epic narratives that celebrated Roman imperial destiny and divine favour. The poet's Proserpine appears as a figure whose authority over the underworld serves broader cosmic purposes that ultimately support Roman imperial success. When Aeneas encounters her during his underworld journey, she functions as a divine administrator whose decisions about posthumous rewards and punishments reflect the same principles of justice and merit that supposedly governed Roman political and social institutions. The Virgilian treatment emphasizes Proserpine's role as a guardian of cosmic order who ensures that divine justice operates according to systematic principles rather than arbitrary preference. This characterization reflected Roman legal traditions that emphasized procedural regularity and institutional continuity, with divine authority functioning according to the same rational principles that governed earthly administration. Virgil's Proserpine thus becomes a celestial magistrate whose judicial decisions support the broader imperial project by demonstrating divine approval for Roman concepts of justice and governance. Claudian's De Raptu Proserpini, composed during the late 4th century AD, represents the most elaborate Roman treatment of the myth and demonstrates how the narrative continued to evolve throughout the imperial period. Writing during a time of increasing political instability and religious transformation, Claudian created a version that emphasized themes of renewal, transformation, and the cyclical nature of imperial power. His Proserpine embodies the empire's capacity for self-renewal through institutional adaptation and cultural synthesis, with her annual journey between worlds serving as a metaphor for Rome's ability to incorporate diverse populations and traditions into a unified imperial system. Claudian's extensive use of allegorical interpretation reflected late antique literary preferences, while also serving contemporary political needs. His Proserpine functions simultaneously as a mythological figure and as a symbol of imperial resilience, with her transformation from victim to sovereign paralleling Rome's evolution from city-state to world empire. The poet's elaborate descriptions of both the upper and lower worlds create detailed geographical and administrative frameworks that mirror the complex bureaucratic structures of the late Roman Empire. The integration of Proserpine into Roman religious calendar systems required substantial modifications to accommodate Roman concepts of time, ritual propriety, and civic obligation. Roman religious authorities recognized that Greek seasonal festivals needed adaptation to align with Roman agricultural patterns, legal schedules, and political requirements. The resulting calendar innovations created new forms of religious observance that maintained connections to Greek mythological traditions while serving distinctly Roman institutional needs. The Roman festival of Cerialia, celebrated annually from April 12 to 19, incorporated elements of Greek thesmophoria traditions while adapting them to Roman social structures and political requirements. Unlike the women-only Greek celebrations, Roman Cerialia included both male and female participants, and emphasized the festival's connections to civic prosperity and imperial stability. Archaeological evidence from Roman Ceres temples reveals architectural features designed to accommodate mixed-gender religious activities, with specialized spaces for different types of ritual observances that reflected Roman concepts of appropriate religious behavior. Roman Cerialia celebrations emphasized the political dimensions of agricultural abundance and divine favor, with ceremonies that explicitly connected successful harvests to imperial prosperity and divine approval for Roman governance. Ancient sources describe elaborate processions that included representations of conquered territories and their agricultural products, demonstrating how the festival served imperial propaganda purposes while maintaining its essential religious functions. These political adaptations transformed Greek seasonal celebrations into Roman imperial ceremonies that reinforced ideological messages about Roman superiority and divine mandate. The Roman festival calendar's integration of Proserpine worship required coordination with existing religious obligations and civic ceremonies that had no Greek equivalents. Roman religious authorities developed sophisticated scheduling systems that allocated appropriate time and resources to Persephone celebrations while maintaining the complex array of civic, military and imperial observances that characterized Roman religious life. Inscriptional evidence from various Roman cities reveals the detailed administrative arrangements necessary to coordinate these multiple religious obligations without creating conflicts or resource shortages. Roman state cult practices incorporated Persephone worship into the broader framework of imperial religious policy that sought to unify diverse populations under common religious observances while respecting local traditions. The resulting synthesis created new forms of religious expression that combined Greek mythological content with Roman institutional structures and imperial ideology. Archaeological investigations at Roman provincial temples reveal architectural features and ritual arrangements that demonstrate this synthetic approach, with building designs that accommodated both traditional Roman religious practices and adapted Greek ceremonial requirements. The Roman Pontifical College's oversight of Persephone worship ensured that religious practices remained consistent with imperial policy, while allowing for regional variations that addressed local needs and preferences. Ancient sources describe detailed regulations governing the selection and training of priests responsible for Persephone ceremonies, with requirements that emphasized both theological knowledge and political loyalty. These administrative arrangements created professional religious hierarchies that could maintain consistent worship practices across the empire's diverse territories while adapting to local conditions and cultural preferences. Roman artistic representations of Persephone reveal sophisticated iconographic programs that combined Greek mythological imagery with distinctly Roman political and cultural symbols. Sculptural programs from major Roman temples show Persephone wearing clothing that suggests both divine authority and Roman aristocratic status, with artistic details that emphasize her role as a civilizing influence who brings order and prosperity to the territories under her governance. These representations served both religious and political functions, providing visual confirmation of theological concepts while reinforcing imperial ideology through symbolic association. The development of distinctly Roman iconographic traditions for Persephone appears clearly in the artistic programs of major public buildings constructed during the imperial period. The reliefs decorating Augustus's Arapacis include subtle references to Persephone's seasonal cycle that connect her agricultural associations to imperial prosperity and the peace that Roman governance supposedly provided throughout the Mediterranean world. These artistic programs demonstrate how mythological imagery could serve imperial propaganda purposes while maintaining genuine religious significance for contemporary audiences. Roman mosaic programs from private villas and public buildings reveal how Persephone imagery functioned in domestic and civic contexts that extended beyond formal religious observances. Archaeological discoveries from sites like Pompeii and Herculaneum have uncovered elaborate floor mosaics that depict scenes from Persephone's myth, integrated with imagery celebrating Roman military victories, imperial achievements, and family prosperity. These decorative programs suggest that Persephone's story resonated with Roman audiences as a narrative about transformation, adaptation, and ultimate success that paralleled their own experiences of cultural change and imperial expansion. The evolution of Persephone's iconography throughout the imperial period reflects changing political circumstances and cultural preferences that influenced how Romans understood and represented divine authority. Early imperial representations emphasize her role as a bringer of abundance and prosperity, who supports imperial stability through her governance of seasonal cycles. Later, imperial imagery increasingly focuses on her authority over death and transformation, reflecting growing concerns about imperial continuity and the challenges of maintaining political stability during periods of crisis and change. Roman frescoes from religious and domestic contexts reveal the sophisticated artistic techniques used to convey complex theological and political concepts through visual imagery. The famous Proserpina frescoes from the Villa of Mysteries at Pompeii demonstrate how mythological narratives could be integrated into mystery religion practices that served both spiritual and social functions. These paintings show Proserpina participating in elaborate initiation ceremonies that transform mortal women into divine beings, creating visual metaphors for the social and political transformations that characterized Roman imperial society. The political applications of Proserpina mythology during the Roman Empire demonstrate how mythological narratives could serve imperial propaganda while maintaining genuine religious significance for diverse populations. Roman political theorists recognized that the story of Proserpina's transformation from abducted victim to powerful queen provided useful metaphors for explaining how conquered populations could achieve prosperity and status within the imperial system. This interpretation served both ideological and practical functions, encouraging provincial acceptance of Roman rule while providing frameworks for understanding cultural change and adaptation. Imperial coinage programs frequently incorporated Proserpina imagery to communicate political messages about imperial stability, agricultural prosperity, and divine favour for Roman governance. Archaeological analysis of coin distributions reveals how these monetary representations carried imperial ideology throughout the empire's commercial networks, reaching audiences that might have limited direct contact with formal imperial institutions. The consistency of Proserpina imagery across different denominations and time periods demonstrates coordinated imperial efforts to promote specific interpretations of her mythological significance. Roman historical writers like Livy and Tacitus occasionally employed Proserpina metaphors to explain political developments and imperial policies that involved the integration of conquered territories into the Roman system. These literary applications demonstrate how mythological frameworks provided intellectual tools for understanding complex political processes, while also serving rhetorical functions that enhance the persuasive impact of historical narratives. The writer's assumption that audiences would understand these mythological references reveals the widespread familiarity with Proserpina's story throughout educated Roman society. The connection between Proserpina worship and imperial ideology becomes particularly clear in the religious policies implemented in newly conquered territories. Roman administrators recognized that local populations often maintained strong attachments to indigenous agricultural deities whose functions paralleled those of Proserpina. Rather than suppressing these local traditions, Roman policy typically sought to identify connections between indigenous deities and Roman religious figures, creating synthetic forms of worship that maintained local cultural elements within broader imperial frameworks. Archaeological evidence from Roman Britain reveals how this synthetic approach operated in practice, with Romano-British temples dedicated to Proserpina incorporating architectural features and ritual arrangements that reflected both Roman religious traditions and indigenous Celtic practices. Inscriptional evidence from these sites documents the complex cultural negotiations that produced hybrid forms of religious expression, with Latin dedications that invoke Proserpina, using Celtic epithets and ceremonial practices that combined Roman and indigenous elements. Similar patterns appear throughout the Roman provinces, with local variations that reflect the specific cultural and religious traditions that Roman administrators encountered in different regions. The flexibility of Proserpina mythology, with its emphasis on transformation and adaptation, made it particularly suitable for these synthetic applications. Provincial populations could maintain connections to their traditional agricultural and seasonal observances while participating in imperial religious systems that reinforced political loyalty and cultural integration. The economic dimensions of Proserpina worship in the Roman Empire extended far beyond the immediate costs of religious ceremonies to encompass broader impacts on agricultural production, trade relationships, and imperial revenue systems. Roman administrators recognized that successful agricultural production depended on maintaining proper relationships between farming communities and the divine powers that governed seasonal cycles and crop fertility. Imperial investment in Persephone temples and festivals thus served both religious and economic functions, supporting agricultural productivity while demonstrating imperial concern for provincial prosperity. The integration of Persephone worship into Roman commercial networks created opportunities for economic development that extended throughout the empire's trading systems. Archaeological evidence revealed specialized industries that produced religious objects, ceremonial vessels, and artistic representations for use in Persephone worship, with production centers located in major urban areas and distribution networks that reached remote provincial communities. These economic activities created employment opportunities while also spreading imperial cultural influence through commercial relationships. Roman tax policies occasionally incorporated religious considerations that reflected the economic importance of agricultural festivals and seasonal celebrations. Imperial administrators recognized that excessive taxation during crucial agricultural periods could disrupt religious observances that supported crop productivity and community stability. The resulting tax schedules often provided reductions or exemptions during festival periods, creating economic incentives that reinforced religious observances while maintaining imperial revenue requirements. The transformation of Greek Persephone into Roman Proserpina thus represents far more than simple cultural translation or religious syncretism. Roman adaptations of the myth created new forms of religious expression that served distinctly imperial purposes while maintaining genuine spiritual significance for diverse populations throughout the Mediterranean world. The resulting synthesis demonstrates the sophisticated cultural and political strategies that enabled Roman imperial expansion, while preserving the essential religious traditions that provided meaning and stability for subject populations across the empire's vast territories. The transformation of Persephone from ancient religious figure to enduring cultural symbol demonstrates the remarkable adaptability of mythological narratives across vastly different historical periods and intellectual frameworks. Medieval Christian scholars encountered the Persephone myth through Latin texts, particularly Ovid's Metamorphoses and various mythographic compilations that had survived the collapse of classical education systems. These medieval interpreters faced the challenge of reconciling pagan mythological content with Christian theological frameworks, leading to sophisticated allegorical interpretations that transformed Persephone into a prefiguration of Christian redemption narratives. The academic study of Persephone has evolved into a sophisticated interdisciplinary field that combines classical scholarship, anthropological analysis, psychological interpretation, and feminist theory to produce comprehensive understanding of the myth's historical development and contemporary significance. University courses examining the Persephone narrative now appear in departments of classics, religious studies, women's studies, psychology, and comparative literature, demonstrating the broad academic recognition of the myth's educational value. Contemporary scholarship continues to produce new interpretations and discoveries that enhance understanding of Persephone's cultural significance. Recent archaeological discoveries, advances in linguistic analysis, and new theoretical frameworks from fields like cognitive science and evolutionary psychology provide fresh perspectives on ancient mythological narratives and their continued relevance for understanding human experience. The enduring appeal of Persephone's story across more than 2 millennia of cultural transmission demonstrates the remarkable capacity of mythological narratives to address fundamental human concerns that transcend specific historical periods and cultural contexts. Her journey from innocent maiden through traumatic transformation to empowered ruler continues to resonate with contemporary audiences facing their own challenges of growth, change, and the search for meaning in experiences of loss and renewal. The myth's sophisticated treatment of themes including family relationships, individual agency, seasonal change, death and rebirth, and the relationship between human experience and cosmic order provides frameworks for understanding complex aspects of existence that remain relevant regardless of technological advancement or cultural change. Persephone's story serves as a bridge between ancient wisdom and contemporary insight, demonstrating how mythological thinking continues to offer valuable perspectives on the eternal human quest for understanding, meaning, and transformation. As humanity faces unprecedented challenges including climate change, social disruption, and rapid technological transformation, the ancient wisdom embedded in narratives like Persephone's myth provides crucial resources for navigating uncertainty and finding hope in the possibility of renewal and regeneration. Her story reminds us that transformation, while often difficult and painful, can lead to greater wisdom, power, and understanding of our place within the larger patterns that govern both human experience and the natural world that sustains all life.